With our usual announcement, pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote
If
participation.
you're speaking, I cannot hear anything if you're speaking.
See if I can point my voice more directly.
You sure? I don't know. I thought I heard Dave trying to speak during the meeting opening.
Yeah. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item.
Lost you again.
Dave, it's not working.
This is not
Dropping
working.
in and out.
Can you try without the mask? Is that?
Let me try it without the mask. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raise hand feature. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Much better.
Okay. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. Every vote will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. So with that, I'll call the roll of the members present here. Justin Wood.
Present.
Bob Hassinger.
I'm here.
Linda Hassinger. Linda?
Linda Hassinger.
I see Linda's face, but,
Here.
okay. And Prabhu Venkatraman?
Well, you're dropping out, Dave.
I can see your lips moving. I think you're calling me, calling my name.
Prabhu.
I'm doing that, so I'm here.
And Maura McCormack?
Here.
Okay, and here with us is staff Chris McGoldrick
Present.
and Natalia Allward.
To help them kick that nasty oxygen that we had once and for all.
Present.
You know, I wish I could be
Present.
an instance that seemed a woman that like you, but unfortunately, I don't hate the world enough. You know what I'm saying?
I couldn't make out what was being said there.
Someone has an open mic, I think, and a noise in the room.
All right,
Ellen,
so let us proceed with our agenda.
Present. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I heard you.
Okay.
And our first agenda item, as always, is public input. If any member of the public is here and wishes to speak on a matter that is not otherwise on the board's agenda for tonight, now would be the time to raise your hand and speak.
Recording in progress.
Sorry, we were still in the practice session. I apologize. Was fiddling with the mics.
Okay, so now that Chris has let the public into our meeting, I will repeat that our first agenda item here is public input. If anyone from the public wishes to speak on a matter that is not otherwise on the board's agenda, now would be the time to raise your hand and speak. Seeing no raised hands, we will move on to our first action item, which is a determination of minor modification at 30 Grafton Common. This is from Verizon Wireless. And as I understand it, they are proposing to replace antennas and associated radio equipment in the steeple at the Congregational Church.
That's correct.
Is there anything more that anybody wants to speak to about this?
I think it's a pretty straightforward application. So you summed it up very well.
Yes, and of note is that the facility does have some associated ground equipment, which is not proposed to be changed. So the entirety of this project takes place within the steeple. Any questions or comments from any of the board members?
Yeah, I don't know whether they're not changing the structure that holds the support equipment, but we don't know whether they're changing it inside, and it doesn't make any difference. Because if they change in the antennas, they might be changing the transmitters. Anyway, I move that we approve the application, the request.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board find that this is a minor
Can't hear
modification.
you, Dave.
Moved and seconded that the board find that this is a minor modification and issue the appropriate paperwork. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood?
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger?
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger? Linda?
Can't hear you, I think he called Linda.
Oh, I didn't hear him. Aye.
And Mr. Venkatraman?
And I think you're calling my name, so from my,
Boy, the owl is right in front of me and it's still not picking up my voice.
Is the PA's, finish the,
So, Mr. Robbins votes aye on the motion. Motion carried unanimously.
okay, are the loudspeakers, microphones in the room turned on? Because I think that's where the problem is. Or that's a, you don't really need
The
the
mic-
microphones and the speakers in the room tonight.
The microphones and
Oh, maybe you do for kid,
the
never mind.
the microphones and
Bill's laughing in the control room there.
Yeah. I don't need to tell them to ignore me.
All right. Our next,
I don't know what-
so we do have a hand raised from the public. I don't know if we want to kind of circle back. I know we had public comment, but or public input from the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if we want to recognize that now. Or,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Chris.
one of our Zoom participants has a hand raised. On the possibility that that has to do with the audio of the meeting, I would invite Linda Hutchins, if you could enable them.
Hi, I think Dave Robbins has recognized me,
yeah. So
Yes,
and I am having a hard time hearing, but that's not what I was commenting about. You were breaking up there pretty badly at the beginning of the meeting, but if I understood correctly, you were asking for public input. Would that be for any of the agenda items tonight?
that would be for any item that is not on the agenda.
can't hear you,
Sorry,
Dave.
I still can't hear you.
Right, I think they were saying not for any of the agenda items.
Oh,
Yeah.
other than agenda items then?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll wait then until the agenda item.
Thank you. Okay. This is going to be exceedingly difficult at the
Whatever
rate
they're
we're going.
saying.
can we turn the
No,
mic?
it's we cannot
Sorry.
hear you at all.
Sorry, if while people are speaking, we need to have one person speaking at a time. The owl gets confused when there's multiple people speaking at the same time and the audio gets choppy. So is everyone able to hear me currently? Bob Hassinger?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you want to? Prabhu, are you able?
Yeah.
Are you able?
Can't
to
hear you.
Sorry, please, please don't immediately say can't hear you, because again, that throws off the owl. Prabhu, are you able to hear me right now? Prabhu?
I
are you
just
able-
heard,
Bob, sorry.
but there was something else that you were saying before that. It looked like you thought you were being heard and you weren't.
Prabhu, are you able to hear me right now? Prabhu, are you able to hear me right now?
You just came in, it looked like you were talking before that.
So I was, so it does take some a little bit of time for the owl to pick up the person who's speaking. So I know that that's not ideal, but please allow a little bit of time for the owl to pick up the audio. We'll try to work on it on our end, but again,
You just dropped down in the middle, Chris. It's not, it wasn't no advanced thing. It's coming and going arbitrarily.
Can you turn the mics on for the room? Can you turn the mics on for the room? I turned the owl
Sure.
mic off. Maybe that's
I'll-
gonna...
Well, I got these speakers on, mics are on in the room.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, yeah. I can
Um,
turn the speakers off if they're effective.
I think that might be what's...
I'll kill the speakers.
Maybe. Yeah, no, never mind.
All right, those speakers are killed. Is there any way, like Dave's computer and Justin's computer can pick up their audio? And we can not use the owl audio?
If the,
That might be a suggestion. We have his, they got their computers, they're tied into the
Yes.
Zoom meeting.
if this, if I turn my mic on in the computer,
It's got feedback.
it's gonna feedback from the owl speaker.
And if we,
Okay.
so whoever has a speaker on has to have the mic on
Right.
only.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. This owl should be
This-
waking up nice and clean.
This would work better if we were all remote.
Maybe. Yeah. Would've. Yeah.
If Bob opens another meeting room, I'm happy to go into another room and log on there.
Maybe. That's what we do. We log out, get them all in a room.
All in separate rooms.
No.
It was working when we tested it, so I don't know what has gone on with the...
Do you hear the testing? Hello?
It's good.
Dave?
All right. I'm gonna speak here. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Right.
At the moment, anyway?
Okay. Let's just play this out a little bit. Play that out. Put that right there. That. Let's play it. Let's see what happens. Let's play this out. See what happens.
Got my vote.
You know what?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good sign.
Okay. Let's ride it. Well, let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. See
All
what
right.
happens.
Are we ready to move on to our first discussion item? Bob, Prabhu, Linda?
Yes.
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 All right, so we have a discussion item on proposed zoning articles.
I'm scared to try and
Uh,
present with this going on. But I will do what I can. Is the audio coming through?
Chris is talking, we can't hear him. Oh, maybe not. Well, let's wait.
So is it, so, oh, 'cause I hit the mute on the owl. So is the audio working now? Am I being picked up?
I hear you.
Okay. So, again, so I apologize for the audio issues tonight. I'm going to try to kind of work through that, but please feel free if you have trouble hearing me to interrupt, and I will do what I can. I will not be offended, I promise. So, all right. Give me a second to get my screens back together here. So I've prepared two presentations tonight on kind of preliminary zoning proposals for the Springtown meeting. These are going to be fairly high level, although I do kind of talk a little bit about the zoning sections that are affected. I wanted to get some preliminary comments from the board to kind of work through these at a conceptual level. And then we're gonna, obviously we'll have a follow-up public hearing when we get to a red line version of the bylaws, and seeking a final recommendation for the planning board to send to select board to be placed on the warrant. So a little bit preliminary here. We have three zoning amendments that are proposed for this upcoming spring town meeting. I've only made presentations for two so far. We'll follow up with a third, and hopefully that will kind of spread things out, because I know it'll be a little bit of a lot to digest, a lot of zoning all at once. So the first that I wanted to present tonight is looking at mixed-use zoning in the neighborhood business and commercial business districts. This was started where some local businesses have approached us, whether the staff or sent letters into the board, seeking to allow expanded mixed-use style development in these districts. And so we wanted to look at kind of how that would play out. Before we start, I wanted to give kind of a refresher on what mixed use is. This may be old hat for some people, but obviously it's good to go over that. So we do have mixed use development in Grafton. It's defined in the Grafton zoning bylaw, section 2, which is our definitions. And it's defined as, a development of two or more compatible land uses such as residential, office, retail, recreational, and light industrial. Further, when we talk about mixed-use zoning, although our bylaw does not define it this way, there's different types of how mixed use can play out. Some towns do define this separately, looking at vertical mixed use, which is kind of your retail below and housing above, or horizontal mixed use, which is different uses in different buildings, but maybe on the same parcel. So there's two different ways of looking at it. Our bylaw is silent on that, so horizontal or vertical mixed use, where it's allowed, could both be considered. That may be something that we want to look at in the future of, parsing out the difference and looking at that. But really, right now, we're just looking at mixed-use zoning in the neighborhood business and commercial business, or community business, zoning districts. Mixed-use zoning is actually somewhat of a traditional development style, although it's seen new kind of use in communities. It's something that has been developed in the past. Whether or not these are existing mixed use, I haven't looked at that, if they're non-conforming or not. But I wanted to give an idea of that in town, seeing that you can have retail above and. Sorry?
The speakers are not working.
Okay. So, sorry, I'll try to kind of turn this way and project my voice a little bit more. But looking at mixed-use zoning in town, I wanted to show that there is development styles that are conducive to mixed-use zoning already in town, and that can be different sizes of scale and architectural style. So that was an idea of a vertical mixed use with, retail above and residential style above. This could be a horizontal mixed use where you see a little bit of a storefront of, to the side of the building, and on the same lot you have a residential setback So this is another parcel in town that's an existing business. I don't know if they rent out. I didn't confirm that, but these are existing development styles that are already in town. And it can be a single-family home and a small business, or it could be a larger scale development. The underlying intensity schedule would ultimately define what could be placed. So we're just looking at the use. Going through our zoning, another thing, another part that might be old hat to some people, but I wanted to review is our table of uses, and specifically looking at mixed use in town. So our table of uses, there's several use codes that allow either by right, plan review, special permit, and plan review are not allowed. And one way of looking at those is looking at least restrictive to most restrictive, where not allowed is something that is just, it wouldn't be allowed other than through a variance of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and has a high threshold in order to achieve. Something that's allowed by right requires very little local board approval and can move straight to the building permit phase. So there is still some review, but it's much more streamlined than certainly a variance requirement would be allowed. Looking at our current zoning, we allow in the village mixed use districts, which were set up primarily to allow village mixed use, that use is allowed by right. Currently in all other districts, including our neighborhood business and community business districts, mixed use is not allowed. So a mixed use proposal, a new development, or potentially redevelopment of existing building into a mixed use would not be allowed. Grafton does not allow use variances in their zoning, and so that is just simply not a path forward for an applicant or an owner of a building. What I'd recommend and will be proposing, and I would like to get the feedback of the board and any comments from the public tonight, is looking at bringing that one notch down on the restrictive uses and allow special permit and site plan review. What that would do is that would open it up to an application to the planning board if a business owner or property owner wanted to include mixed use on their site. They can bring it to the board through the special permit and plan review process, which allows the local board to review it under their set criteria of special permits and site plans. But before moving forward, obviously we have to look at any of these zoning changes. Where are the areas that would be affected by any zoning change? Are there unintended consequences? What would that, where are the areas that this might be appearing? And so looking at that, there are 6 areas in town that are either the neighborhood business or the community business zoning districts. What I've included there is the district intents, which are in our zoning bylaw, district intents and purposes, which set out a vision for each of these areas and what the zoning is meant to achieve. I highlighted in red, if you see, a lot of the language in the neighborhood business and the community business zoning districts are looking at achieving those traditional New England Village style developments, avoiding the appearance of commercial strips and retaining that character of the New England Village. They're also looking at small-scale business development and residential low-density or medium-density development. Going further into those zones, I wanted to put each of those up to show exactly where either the neighborhood business districts or the community business districts are. So the first, which I've named just put up there as the New England Village neighborhood, just to be called. And I've included a number of kind of markers to help people orient where they are. So this is in the North Grafton. We're going to be moving from North Grafton down to South Grafton through those zoning districts. But there's St. Mary's Parish located here, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church over here, Ed's Auto Sales and Service Center, and the Post Office Pub. And so those kind of set the boundaries of what that New England Village neighborhood looks like. As you can see, this is the neighborhood business in red. There's residential and agriculture, as well as industrial zones nearby. So this is just kind of an overview, trying to give a little bit of a massing model of what that looks like, what the development existing looks like. So you do see that there's a number of kind of medium residential and some larger multifamily, as well as commercial developments throughout that area. And then on the ground, I took some snapshots of the area just to give a flavor of the existing development in town, so that we could take a look at that. So again, it's already a mixture of a lot of commercial and residential uses. Some of them are on separate lots, some of them are potentially non-conforming pre-existing. So again, here's a retail storefront with apartments above. Looking at our second area, there's the Worcester Street North Commercial Corridor. So you have Reunion Tap and Table, Princess Nails, and Grafton Pizza, which is that kind of commercial plaza area. You have Lucente Jewelers, Foreign Auto Repair, Pub 122, and Five Star Liquors. So this is along the Route 122 corridor. It's also abutting the Village Mixed Use WS District as well, and features some residential multifamily, which is a more medium or higher density residential, as well as a little bit of industrial over on that side. So that's another kind of overview, just trying to go to show the kind of development style, a bird's eye view of what that zone kind of looks like. So you have, it's a little bit split by the multifamily developments here. Again, somewhat of a commercial plaza along this way, but this is definitely more of a commercial, one of the more commercial sized developments in town. So these are on the ground views. I'm sure people are familiar with if they've driven through town, certainly along Route 122. The next district that would be affected if we move forward with this is the Worcester Street South Commercial District. We have Stop and Shop in this area, Unibank, Koopman's Lumber, Cancun's, Dunkin' Donuts, and where we are, next to where we are, Grafton Middle School down in this area. So again, this is a kind of bird's eye view of that corridor, just showing some of the businesses that are currently located there. This is another very commercial leaning strip. This is on the ground, just looking at the development. Again, primarily commercial strip, and along that 122 corridor, building setback, parking in front. Our fourth district is actually the Grafton Common. So looking at that, I'm sure people are familiar with that, but again, we have one Grafton Common here. The old DPW garage, again, that's in the Village Mixed Use Gateway District, which was recently approved and is seeking redevelopment as Village Mixed Use Development. We have the Congregational Church of Grafton, the Grafton Public Library, which is recently redone, the Grafton Fire Department, and JCSI. So those kind of set the boundaries of that district. As you'll note, that one Grafton Common, we use that as an example before of those development styles that are existing in that mixed use almost style, if not use already. So here's our bird eye view again. The examples, again, looking at those two buildings across from each other where presumably you could, or in the past, had apartments above, retail below. Similarly, you see a mixture of either commercial uses that might be conducive to additional residential components added to them in their existing densities, a mixture of uses next to each other of residential and commercial. There's the Grafton Fire Department. Another district that, our fifth district that would be considered is 188 Providence Road. So this is primarily, what you'll see in the next photo is primarily undeveloped space. It is a portion of the parcel that is zoned as community business, but as it stands, it's currently vegetated. But it is surrounded by multifamily developments. And then finally, our sixth district is the Main Street Commercial Strip. This is primarily on the south side of Main Street, 122A. Looking at the Village Dairy, First Bite Cafe and Pizza, and MagnaFlow Exhaust are some of the tenants along that route. And this is the neighborhood business district. So here's our bird's eye view of that, showing the densities. And again, another strip of development that is seeing some of the commercial strip development and where mixed use may allow some additional redevelopment of these sites and attract new investment. So again, existing uses of retail with potential for apartments above. A lot of these areas already seem to feature either in a non-conforming way or at least feature the architectural style that would be conducive to mixed use. So that's the preliminary on that. So I guess I'd like to open it up first to the board for questions and comments on that preliminary review and get some feedback, and then we can I'll develop a more concise plan for looking at warrant language. But just to circle back again, we're looking at the proposal is primarily to allow by special permit and site plan review mixed use within the neighborhood business and community business districts.
All right, so I'll try to be relatively brief since the owl has a hard time picking my voice up, and I don't know if anybody will hear me. But I have recently been taking a close look at residential past and present housing in Grafton, and one of the things that I found was that I've identified a number of buildings that are currently in mixed use, actively combining commercial typically on the first floor and residential on a second floor or some variation thereof. So several of the properties you have in the pictures are in fact currently mixed use. All of that dating from before zoning even existed. Some may be under earlier incarnations of zoning, all currently obviously non-conforming as that kind of use is not currently allowed. But in most of these districts, I think we will find that a mixed use as proposed here is quite compatible with the character of the district and with the existing use in the district. One further observation that we continue to think about additional areas that could benefit from something more comprehensive, something like a variant of village mixed use. And all I would say to that is that doing what you've proposed, Chris, is, I think, complementary to any future consideration. So future consideration still could do, say, take a more comprehensive look at the New England Village area and create a variant of village mixed-use zoning for that. But that doesn't preclude what appears to be something simple here that, as I said, appears generally compatible with what's already happening in many of those areas.
I pretty much agree with Dave. I would like to have a chance to have, the folks out there hear about this and see if anybody has an issue. I'm pretty sure we're not gonna hear from anybody, but I think I'd like to, maybe I'm missing things that they might bring up.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Yeah. At this stage, as
Yeah.
Chris, yes, Bob?
I couldn't hear you.
At this point, as Chris has mentioned, this is sort of a work in progress, that when the board nails down a specific zoning bylaw proposal, there will, of course, be a public hearing. And I think, as Bob suggested, it wouldn't hurt to sort of invite some observations more informally from the community prior to that time. But in any case, there will be a public hearing on this, assuming that we proceed to put this onto a town meeting warrant.
Should we vote to ask Chris to put it together as a proposed article?
So I don't think a vote necessarily is needed. I certainly would proceed that way, but I just wanted to get some feedback and make sure that this is a direction that certainly the board wanted to pursue. Certainly solicit some feedback from any residents in attendance, and hopefully create a little bit of a buzz of what we're doing, so that when we get to the public hearing process, there's some more participation. So that was kind of my intent for tonight. Again, going a little bit high level, and then delving more into the details at that public hearing process. I do note we have two participants' hands raised. I'd be happy to allow them to, or recognize them at the.
Yeah, although this is not typically something for which we solicit public input at this stage, but as long as we've raised the possibility of getting some information from the public, if we do have some brief comments from the public on this topic, I'd be willing to allow that. So we have, just going down my list of attendees, Ed Devney and Melissa Mazan.
Hi. Not sure if you can hear me. I haven't heard everything you said. This is Melissa Mazan. We live at 6 South Street in Grafton. First of all, thank you very much. This is the first I've ever heard in terms of comprehensive explanation of zoning and mixed use. So that's great. Really interesting, really useful. My second question is, these are really, looks like it's room for interesting and enjoyable small businesses, but what is the planning board doing, or does the planning board even have a position for bringing in larger businesses, not in a mixed use space, that might help the tax basis? And that's all. And really, thank you so much for this. It was great.
Yeah, the larger topic of other businesses is certainly something of interest. Really, I don't think we can speak to that meaningfully right now in this context, but it's a topic of interest for sure. Mr. Aberg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is the funkiest Zoom I've ever been on. But this is Rob Aberg at 43 South Street. Thank you guys for presenting this, Chris. One thing it struck me while we're planning for some of these small businesses is getting a sign up for a small business can be a big deal. Is there any notion to having a whole small business package that goes with zoning, streamlined, pre-approved thematic signs for each area. That this zone, we've got a pre-approved sign in this and this size. You do that when it goes right through or something. And anything else that really encourages one of these neighborhood businesses to be successful without, giving them a bulldozer full of paperwork to figure out. Because the smaller the business, the less likely they are to have time for such a thing. Just a thought. Thanks.
So I just, to that point, thank you for that comment. I think in a way, maybe not directly to the paperwork as you mentioned, but I do want to note that that's part of what we're looking at with this zoning adjustment is, as was noted, a lot of these are existing businesses already in this mixed use style. So by changing it to special permit, when they look to redevelop, it does lower the threshold rather than coming in as a non-conforming business and having a higher threshold to achieve either expansion or redevelopment or, even sometimes bringing in a new tenant rather than having that as a challenging regulatory hurdle. We've reduced the bar slightly to allow that, and they do still come to a local board, the planning board in this case, and it still is reviewed. But again, it allows that to move forward rather than being outright denied. So hopefully it'll allow the existing businesses a little bit to thrive more.
Yeah, there are some interesting topics for further discussion here that are related to but not directly about this particular proposal on the table. But there are some other topics that I hope the Planning Board and the Economic Development Commission and other bodies can pursue some of these topics.
Yeah, I'd like maybe to, this is almost low hanging fruit as it is now. Maybe get that done because the large, the other questions are going to take more time than we're going to have for Springtown meeting, I think.
Yeah. So if there is nothing else on this particular topic, I know, Chris, you had another zoning topic, but I'm going to suggest that since it is now well past 7:30, that we defer further discussion on various other items so that we can do the public hearings that we have scheduled.
I would agree.
So having said that now, our first public hearing is a continuation. Is everybody still hearing me? It becomes kind of important that everybody be able to hear what's going on here. Okay, so we have, as I started to say, we are continuing the public hearing that was opened 3 weeks ago, but immediately continued because of the unavailability, or I should say, continued by request of the applicant. And this is for the special permit and site plan approval of known as Brigade Village at 41 Church Street and 14 West Street. And the purpose of this hearing, it's a little bit unusual. So let me just explain what we've got here. Back on February 12th of 2019, the applicant filed with the board an application for a special permit to construct a multifamily development consisting of 11 buildings on property located at 41 Church Street and 14 West Street. The board denied the special permit on October 21st, 2019. The denial was based on the board's vote to deny the requested waiver of the 500-foot maximum length of a dead-end street set forth in the subdivision rules and regulations. The applicant appealed the board's denial to land court, and after trial, the land court judge issued a decision on December 9th, 2021, remanding the matter to this board to have it, quoting from the decision, to have it reconsider its decision or at least explain why it did what it did, unquote. The court points to a prior project known as Hillview Estates approved back in 2003, which the court found had a roughly comparable roadway situation. And in that case, that board did vote to grant the requested waiver of the dead-end street limit. This led the current court to conclude that the board in the current case did not adequately explain the denial, hence the directive to reconsider or explain. The court remanded this matter to this board for the limited purpose of giving the board, through its members, the opportunity to either reconsider or provide an explanation for any vote against granting the waiver to the regulation governing the maximum length of the dead-end street. Thus, these proceedings tonight will be limited to that discrete issue. And the first question to be answered as we get into the board's consideration of this is the board prepared to reconsider or explain based on the existing record, or does the board wish to receive additional information in order to assist in said reconsideration or explanation? So my question to the board is, do any of the board members believe that we need additional information? So I'll ask each of the board. Mr. Hassinger.
Yes, I felt at the time that we had gathered all the information pretty much that we possibly could. Perhaps we should note that the boards that made the two different decisions were very different, making them at very different times and circumstances.
All right. So Bob, as I understand it, you believe that the board has sufficient information now to respond to the court's direction, correct? And
Yes.
Linda, do you?
I can't.
Mr. Chairman, can't hear what you're saying.
Ms. Hassinger, Linda, do you believe that we have sufficient information to proceed?
Yes.
And Mr. Venkatraman, do you believe that you have sufficient information to proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
And I will concur. So that, by this, I understand the board to be unanimously in agreement that we do not seek additional information in order for us to act on the remand as directed by the court. That being the case, if the board sees no need to gather additional information, it would be appropriate. Let me just take one small step back. The record that the board will be basing its review of and essentially either affirming or modifying its decision, the record will be as it existed when the decision was originally rendered, with the addition of the court's order. That becomes part of the record. Beyond that, I understand the board to take the position that the board does not need to add anything more to the record. Bob.
Dave.
Bob, go ahead.
I wonder if it would be possible or even desirable to add the recordings of the meetings, the video recordings of the meetings. Perhaps our counsel can suggest.
So yeah, I would defer to town council, if those are already a part of the record.
I understand they're not.
Okay. Ginny, are you, did she fall off the call?
She's on the call.
Ginny's talking, we can't hear her.
She's
She's
not.
mute.
She's not. My zoning may have put her to sleep. Ginny, are you able to unmute your?
Well, perhaps we can say, proceed as she advises. When she can communicate.
So I think she may be having some audio issues.
Hi, sorry about that, Chris.
Yeah. So
Hear me?
yeah, we can. So yeah, the question that was being posed is whether or not the video recordings from the hearings for the appeal are part of the public record. The board is considering whether or not they want to have that included.
But I don't understand, when you say the public record, do you mean of this board or do you mean of the court?
I think the question is, if the board is to act on the record for this decision, the record basically as it existed when the board issued the denial, does that record already include, even though it's not listed in the decision, does that record include the recordings of the meetings? Do I get that right, Bob?
Yes, I'm not sure that, I think if the court wanted to see in more detail about some of the things that have been discussed, videos would be helped, and last I heard, that wouldn't be possible at the moment. But could we add the recordings and open that up?
Okay, so the court will not, the video recordings will not be a part of the court's record. If any member of this board would like to watch them, they're welcome to do that. But with respect to the court, these proceedings on appeal are reviewed what is called de novo, which is a Latin phrase meaning at once. Basically, they start all over again. So that means that the court can take some of the evidence before the planning board, some of the evidence that was not before the planning board, any combination of anything it wants to reach its decision. And even the meeting minutes are not evidence of anything other than the fact that a meeting took place at a certain time and who was present at that meeting. So certainly the video recordings are not part of the court's record.
Okay, look, forget my idea.
All right. Is there anything else, that the board wants to speak to regarding regarding the question of whether we keep the hearing open to gather additional information or close the hearing and proceed with the business of drafting a decision. Again, just to, just to reiterate, the board, this is up to the board. If the board does not desire to include any additional information in the record that we use to do the decision this time around, if there's nothing else that we need to add to the record, then I think it would be appropriate to close the hearing and proceed to to begin the process of drafting a decision. Bob?
I move to close the hearing and proceed with drafting the appropriate responses.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the public hearing be closed and the board begin work drafting a decision. Any discussion of that motion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a roll call vote. Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Yes.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. The motion carried unanimously. Our normal practice would be to direct staff to begin drafting a decision and for the board to then discuss and deliberate on at our next meeting. Does staff?
That's what I have. That's what I tried to ask for in the motion.
Yep. So with that, the next question for staff is, do you have enough information to begin work on drafting a decision? Now,
I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the key points will be for the board to revisit that vote on the waiver. And
Yeah, so what I might recommend is with the public hearing closed, I can begin drafting either the amended decision or the documents moving forward to give a basis for the board to review. Certainly, they'll have to discuss the waiver, I think will be the key point, which is the matter of the remanded hearing. But I can start by creating a draft of essentially the decision as it was with the that waiver question reopened, and that will start the discussion for the board.
Yep.
And the deliberation.
I don't know, given the technical difficulties we're having tonight, I would not particularly want the board to attempt to begin a discussion tonight to give you any guidance on the waiver.
Yes. I think that'll go better when we have the draft.
Yes.
And maybe we'll actually be able to communicate.
Yes, I'd prefer to continue this work in an environment where we're not having communication difficulties. So, yeah, we've disposed of that. We've voted to close the hearing and direct staff to begin work on a decision. And unless
That was what I asked.
And unless something comes up to change it, we will expect to be spending some time deliberating on this decision at our meeting in 2 weeks, March 14th.
Mr. Chair, just as a point of notice, we have 3 new public hearings scheduled for the next planning board meeting. Would it be worthwhile trying to consider a special meeting to take up this discussion on the decision?
As long as it's within this room.
But I'm not sure that we'll need a long discussion.
Right.
Let's see.
Yep, I would say let's plan on discussing this on the 14th.
Okay.
And if we do run into a time constraint, we can then, if necessary, set aside some extra time somewhere. But for now, let's just plan on the 14th for this. And having said all that, thank you, Town Council and the applicant for bearing with us through all this.
Can I just raise a point of order?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Is it continued to a time certain on the 14th?
7:30.
7:30, I'm sorry if I missed that. Thank you.
Actually,
I'm not sure whether that's what we always do.
well,
Actually, don't know.
no, we closed the public hearing, and we don't normally schedule deliberations for a time certain. But we just voted to close the public hearing.
Got you. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, best that we all are clear on what happened. Okay.
Sorry, but is that, so should we vote to continue to a time certain, correct? No?
No, he's correct. The public hearing is closed, so the deliberations did not have to be.
Understood.
Sorry about that. Should not have interjected.
Yeah. All right, if there's nothing else on this topic, and I don't think there is until we come back to deliberate on the decision, we'll move on to our next, and for tonight, final public hearing. This also is a continuation of the request for a special permit and site plan approval at 244 Worcester Street. That's on the Wyman Gordon property. And what has happened since the last hearing on this is the applicant has done a lot of work on the topic of traffic. And we just very, very recently received an updated traffic impact analysis, and late this afternoon, we received the peer review report from our traffic consultant. And so where we're at now is, I think I'd invite the applicant to bring us up to date. And as I said, it's what's most notably changed and is traffic and some items related to traffic.
Mr. Donnie, you can come closer if you want because of the technical issues we're having today.
You want.
Yeah, we will see how well this works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mark Donahue from Fletcher Tilton on behalf of the applicant. In the spirit of trying to bring you up to date, just to put it on the record that there's a few things that have happened before we get to traffic in some fashion. You've received, and it's part of the record that's available on the town website, a letter of support from the Grafton Economic Development Commission for the development, speaking specifically about the desire of the commission to initiate efforts to diversify the tax base. You received a letter from me dated February 24th, which reminded the board of the special permit standard and how we think we met that, and we're glad to talk about that now or at a future meeting. But I refer to it now specifically because it appended a memorandum we had done by a fiscal analysis group looking at the potential tax impacts and also the potential other economic impacts of the development in some fashion, and demonstrated that the town could reasonably expect annual tax revenue of greater than $600,000 from this development once completed, with significant dollars being thrown off into the general economy, obviously not all captivated in Grafton, in jobs and other indirect expenses and the like. And we're glad to talk about those. As the chair indicated, a fair amount of work has happened since the December 3rd first peer review letter you received from MDM. It asked particularly the applicant to do what's referred to as a sensitivity analysis, and I'll let Scott Thornton of Vanessa describe that in a little bit more detail. We've done that work. It took a little bit of time because it required some fairly detailed analysis, but glad to do it. And not to ruin the whole story, but to get to the last chapter, as a result of that, we've proposed some other additional changes to the development, particularly with some off-site mitigation that's now incorporated into that. That's on top of changes that we've reviewed before to remind the board and the audience. The project has reduced in size so that it can fit with the required parking, so a significant reduction in the size of the building. In response to comments received from abutters, the height of the building has been reduced, so it now comports to the zoning bylaw, and therefore no waiver is requested. And if time permits this evening, we can also review some of the work that's been done by the landscape architect to review buffering at the request of the board, in which some good quality work has been done, and we can demonstrate that if time does permit. So with your permission, what I'd like to do is have Scott Thornton of Vanessa Associates, the traffic consultant for the applicant, briefly review the basis for the work that he's done since December, but more importantly, review with you some of the changes, and then give Bob Michaud, your consultant on traffic, an opportunity to address those and see if they've met his concerns.
Thank you. And before it slips my mind, I note that we do have a letter from you regarding the extension of the deadlines.
I wasn't going to let you leave before we dealt with it.
Yeah, I figure, I want to make sure that we don't,
Yep.
that we don't
No,
neglect
absolutely.
that.
Yep.
But, you know, I'll let, you know, I'll let you choose the best time to address that.
Why don't I, for the benefit of at least letting the viewing audience and the like deal with the substance, we can come to that. I don't think we'll spend a lot of time on it in any
Yeah.
event, but we'll leave the board.
Yeah,
So-
that's essentially sort of a routine housekeeping thing, but we want to make sure that we
Agreed.
do it.
Yep, agreed. Good. So if I might, Mr. Chairman, have Mr. Thornton kind of review his report and the work he's done?
That would be good.
Great. Scott?
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you, Attorney Donahue. Scott Thornton, Vanessa Associates, prepared the traffic assessment for the project. As Attorney Donahue mentioned, we prepared a detailed response to the December 3rd, 2021 letter from your peer consultant, MDM Associates. And if I could, I'd like to share my screen and just go through a few slides. Whenever I can be allowed to share the screen, that would be great. But I think, you know, as Attorney Donahue mentioned, some of the, you know, the critical items for the response letter included a sensitivity analysis, a review of some of the traffic adjustments that we used in the initial study, detailed review of monitoring program and mitigation measures, and all of those have been accounted for in this revised. Just a second, in this revised assessment. So, a second. So my screen has locked up. Oh, everything's locked up.
The video froze.
Technical issues all around tonight.
So, Mr. Chair, my screen is locked up. I'm going to try a few things and see if I can get back on.
This is our technology night.
It certainly is. I may have to leave it.
How about taking down his ability to share and then putting it back up?
See if that works, because I cannot do. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Don't touch whatever you did.
Wow. So can you see the screen peer review response letter?
Now,
No,
right now
we
you've got
haven't.
an index of,
A list of files.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Or
there's nothing showing now, Scott.
How about now?
Down, there we go.
Yay.
Yep.
Excellent. Apologize for the snafus there. So some of the points in the response letter, the sensitivity analysis included an estimate of higher vehicle trips than what we had initially expected with the traffic assessment. The goal there is to identify weakness in the road network. And to that end, we estimated trips associated with the development consistent in a manner specified by MDM, which resulted in traffic increases more than double. In the morning time period, it's about 150% change, and in the evening time period, it's about 166% change. So much higher traffic volumes than initially expected. And again, the goal of that is to sort of provide a benchmark or a backstop for what the site may generate using different traffic generation methodology. We also looked at the revision to the project access. Initially, we had traffic entering at two of the driveways associated with the site. That's since been revised so that all project traffic enters at the east driveway. Trucks are permitted to exit at the west driveway, intending to return to the west and to the Mass Pike. Project traffic will be allowed to exit the east driveway, but that could be vehicle traffic or passenger vehicle traffic or truck traffic. But the majority of the trucks are expected to exit through the west driveway, as they would be continuing west to the exit 11 intersection. And there would be a gate proposed at the entrance to the western driveway from the loading area associated with the site that would only permit trucks to access that point. The west driveway would remain for Wyoming Gordon employees and not for project employees. That would really remain as it currently exists, with traffic for Wyoming Gordon entering at that site. Off-peak operations there associated with the Wyoming Gordon employees coming in at that driveway. So really remains similar to the existing condition. And then we had also prepared a roadway or inclusive improvement plan for some widening in front of Worcester Street, which includes a left turn lane into the site, as well as some other modifications. And all widening associated with Worcester Street and this improvement will be done on the project property. So we would hold the southern edge of Worcester Street, and any widening that would be required to accommodate additional lanes would occur moving into the site. And I'll get to a detailed plan of that coming up. Some of the other other additional points, we added 3 intersections to the study area, as was discussed at the last planning board meeting. These are the locations that are to the east, associated with Bridge Street and North Main Street. And I'll show an exhibit that identifies those locations. As I mentioned, we updated the trip distribution, COVID adjustments, parking demand estimates. We did do level of service analysis, not much change from the initial analysis. We did address the trucks separately, as was done in the initial analysis. We also provided some expanded TDM measures, ways to reduce the employee traffic, keep employees on site with expanded facilities to limit the amount of trips employees would make during the day. We're also proposing, we had previously proposed a traffic monitoring program, and we've identified some additional measures for that program and beefed it up quite a bit. Well, that monitoring program also ties to potential supplemental mitigation, which could include signal timing, optimization, signage, other on-site operation and management procedures that would be intended to, again, further reduce the peak hour traffic associated with the project. So this exhibit details the additional locations that were reviewed as part of the revised traffic assessment. And so you can see the first 4 locations to the west were the initial study area. And then we expanded the study area to the east to look at the intersections of North Main Street, Bridge Street, North Main Street with Worcester Street, and Bridge Street with Worcester Street. And we did counts out there at those locations in January, made appropriate seasonal and COVID adjustments, and conducted analysis. We revised our trip distribution based on journey to work data, which was requested by MDM, and we're showing some additional traffic, I think a little more traffic coming from this area, coming from the east than what we had initially anticipated. But again, not really any changes overall as a result of the project in terms of operations or level of service. A couple things that we did know was that, and I think it was mentioned by possibly some of the planning board members, it was definitely mentioned by the audience, the left turn movement from Worcester Street to Bridge Street was noted to have a lot of, noted to have some issues associated with it. We did look at the traffic volumes there in the morning period. There's actually more traffic turning left onto Bridge Street and coming up to North Main Street than there is traffic continuing down Worcester Street onto 122. So that movement, when you get to the North Main Street signalized intersection, that left turn movement is a level of service F under existing conditions. So there's some delay associated with that movement. You know, there may be some opportunities to retime and optimize the signal timing and phasing at that location, and that's something that is a location that we've marked as something to study during the monitoring program. Otherwise, we looked at the operations at the unsignalized intersections across from the street, across from the site, and also the exit 11 ramps. Given the revised adjustment and recommendations from MDM to review the analysis, which were included in the revised traffic assessment. So this plan indicates shows the concept for roadway widening on Worcester Street in front of the site, and it's, you know, I do apologize for the scale of the drawing, but there's a fair amount of widening and roadway modification that would be required here. I'm going to try to zoom in and hopefully things don't fall apart. But so what we're proposing, as was mentioned previously, this center curb cut would be closed as part of the project. We would be proposing a widening of Worcester Street to provide a left turn lane into the site. The project would meet left turn lane warrants there. So we're proposing, and also it's a reasonable idea to pull out our traffic from the through movements on Worcester Street, so that they could minimize the delay associated with the through traffic. We're proposing some, restriping to provide separate left and right turn lanes. I cannot see it, scroll to the right. There's some additional widening that's required east of the site driveway in order to provide protection for the left turn lane. This would all be done through striping. We're proposing to maintain front shoulders on Worcester Street. And then we're also proposing this sidewalk on the south side of Worcester Street, with the idea being that there's a missing link in the pedestrian connectivity between Brigham Hill Road and Dearborn Street. The other thing, so the sidewalk basically stops at Brigham Hill, and then pedestrians are intended to walk along Maplewood Drive. Then they get to Dearborn Street, and Dearborn Street is under existing conditions, it's about a 120-foot wide curb cut, which is a challenge for pedestrians to navigate in a safe manner. And what we're proposing to do is to tighten that intersection up to provide some definition for vehicles entering and exiting. Also provide pedestrian refuge island in the center, so pedestrians walking from one side to the other can stop if need be. And we're by tightening up the intersection with some loam and seed in this area, with some striping on this side of the Maplewood Dearborn Street intersection. And then on the other side, looking at sort of teeing up that intersection to make it a little bit of a easier path for vehicles to turn right from, and also maintain a pedestrian crossing there. We think that that's a real improvement for pedestrians and also for motorists that would possibly be looking to make that entering movement with a high degree of speed, which tends to happen in an uncontrolled location such as this. So that is part of the plan. Again, and you can kind of see on the plan where we're starting the taper in this area, and then the edge of the pavement moves further north to accommodate the widened Worcester Street with a left turn lane. Back up here, and so then the last point that I wanted to touch on before turning it over to Bob Michaud, your peer consultant, was we had seen a comment from the town related to actual driveway counts of facilities or similar facilities. And we had done a few warehouse developments in Bellingham on Maple Street. And the first one was located at 355 Maple Street. That was a combination warehouse and distribution center facility. It was 280,000 square feet, had about 40 employees. Based on ITE, the site would be expected to generate about 282 daily trips, 69 morning peak hour trips, and 76 peak hour evening trips. As part of the condition of approval for that development, they were required to do a monitoring program and follow up traffic counts of their driveway. And in 2016, which was about a year after the site was occupied, we went out and did traffic counts during the daily, morning, and evening time periods. And in the daily time period, both in 2016 and 2017, they were averaging about 200, between 216 and 222 daily trips. And that's the total vehicles entering and exiting the site over a 24-hour period. During the morning peak hour, the total trips were between 18 and 20. During the evening peak hour, the trips were between 19 and 27. And the idea, presenting this information just gives you an idea of how the traffic counts for actual facilities can vary from ITE. The next site is right up the road on Maple Street, and we did counts out there last year, summer of last year. That's 127,000 square foot facilities. We don't have an idea of the number of employees, but and we did not do daily counts. We only did the peak hour counts there. But as you can see, during the morning time period, the driveway counts are significantly lower than the ITE estimates. And the evening time period, they're similar but still lower than what ITE would indicate. And I provided the trips from the initial traffic study for the 244 Worcester Street project, just to give you an idea of how these, how the ITE numbers compare. And again, these trips are based on the original size, the 375,000 square foot facility, which has since been downsized to 331,000 square feet. But I just thought it would be helpful for the board to understand that, the observations and the real world results of some of these facilities can vary, to the positive or to the benefit that of what ITE would indicate. And we've had the benefit of doing both ways. We looked at probably the typical approach, the ITE approach based on the square footage of the facility and the intended user, which is a warehouse. And then we've done a sensitivity analysis that was requested by your consultant. And then there's this other data, which indicates that, there's also the real likelihood that the project traffic could be even lower than the ITE data would otherwise indicate. So I think that's my last slide for traffic, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, or we can turn it right over to your consultant. Thank you.
Any questions from the board at this point? I'm certainly interested in hearing the peer reviews, response to this, and maybe after that, if the board has questions, we could sort of address them together. But if anybody has a question right now, let me know. Okay.
I have questions, but I think I'll wait for the peer review consultants' inputs. Dave.
Okay, through the chair, I'll give a brief recap of our review. For the record, Robert Michaud, Managing Principal with MDM Transportation Consultants. I won't go into every aspect of our review. I'll hit the highlights for brevity. I think the principal requested information we were looking for related to the so-called sensitivity analysis, and that was requested on the basis of at least the potential for the facility to have a relatively high employment level. The originally submitted material based its trip activity estimates on a building square footage, and as Mr. Thornton had just pointed out, there can be vast variability in trip activity for warehouse distribution facilities based on their size. And that has very much to do with the actual employment levels that these facilities have. In the example he pointed out in Bellingham, 280,000 square foot building, I believe that had an employment level of only about 40 people, where this application has explicitly called out a maximum shift employment level of 229 employees or 300 total employees. So I think that variable is what drove us to request the sensitivity analysis. And I'm glad to say that the applicant, Vanessa Associates, has produced exactly what we asked for, and that does indicate a higher level of impact, and it better justifies the mitigation and the access-related improvements that were just reviewed at the front door. So our second principal point had to do with mitigation at the front door. We've reviewed the proposed conceptual improvements, and we find that they have merit. They do include a substantial enhancement to the pedestrian environment, which was a primary objective of our comment, by providing the missing link, if you will, of sidewalk along Route 122. In addition to pedestrian accommodation, it would appropriately accommodate for the principal movement into the site, the left turn lane, so as not to unduly inhibit traffic flow on Route 122, the through traffic. We find that it provides ample capacity for that purpose. But we do have a couple of remaining comments that relate to those improvements. I think they're relatively minor and certainly would be subject to Mass DOT review and approval. One being the need to provide connectivity from the site to the sidewalk system. That could be achieved through a high visibility pedestrian crossing somewhere along the site frontage or in the vicinity of Deer Elm Street. And secondly, the extension of where the terminus of the proposed sidewalk is indicated on the concept so that it matches up with the actual terminus of the existing sidewalk on that side. So relatively straightforward amendments to that concept that we would advise the applicant to discuss with Mass DOT. We do note that the new concept has not been fully tested for commercial truck sweeps, auto turn analysis. We would advise that the applicant simply ensure that whatever design is advanced under the Mass DOT process, that component be evaluated carefully so that the improvements can properly accommodate the swept path of commercial vehicles to or from the property. Relative to parking, our initial review had indicated that while there are zoning requirements that drive the need for what was shown for parking, that the industry standards, if applied to the use, would indicate a substantially lower parking demand than what was shown on the plan set. So we would advise that the land banking of parking in excess of the industry standard calculated demand levels should be considered in the application so as not to provide excess paved area that would most likely not be used on any regular basis. And finally, on the mitigation component, and this really relates in part to the mitigation monitoring program that the applicant has outlined, which we concur with, that specific focus should be placed at the signal at the I-90 exit 11 ramp system. Put simply, in the evenings, westbound traffic flow is very heavy in that area. The analysis that was submitted, the revised analysis, very clearly indicates that there's a constraint, capacity constraint for the westbound movement at that signal, and that any additional traffic volume, whether added to the left or through movements there, which would account for more than half of the traffic to this property, could create a longer queue than necessary. So we would advise that even prior to the monitoring, that the applicant consider, upon occupancy of the building, optimizing the signal timing and phasing at that location so as to ensure that those types of queues do not unnecessarily occur, of course, subject to Mass DOT review and approval. Beyond that, the applicant has provided supplemental analysis to the east of the property. Mr. Thornton correctly points out that the constraints, if you will, the capacity constraints that exist to the east, particularly at the intersection, bear with me. The intersection of Bridge Street and North Main Street, eastbound direction in the morning and southbound direction in the evening, operate with longer delays. While we find that the proposed project does not materially increase the amount of traffic in those particular movements at those particular times of day, we do find merit in retiming the signal to ensure that it works as efficiently as possible. And the applicant has also indicated the potential benefit of restriping portions of that particular intersection to ensure that the vehicle sweeps for larger commercial vehicles will properly fit through the intersection without impacting travel in the opposing lanes. That's an existing issue that really is independent of the project. The project itself does not anticipate adding larger commercial vehicles to that particular easterly location, but we think there is merit to restriping that particular intersection to address those pre-existing issues. I'll conclude there to say that there was a comprehensive response, but for those few commentary items that I just went through, we're satisfied with the nature and extent and completeness of the applicant's response, and I'm glad to answer any specific questions the board might have. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me put it out to the board. You guys have any questions or comments on the updated traffic and the peer review?
I do.
Oh, yes.
I would be shocked if no one had comments. Justin spoke up first.
Sure. So my first comments, just to double check, any changes to 122, which includes the widening, the lane changing, and the sidewalk. Those all would have to be reviewed and approved by Mass DOT. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
That is correct.
On the widening itself, is the proposed pavement increase expected to be on the north-facing side on your parcel itself?
All of the widening is on the applicant's property or other property. The south boundary essentially remains the same.
Okay. And then in regards to Deerholm Street, that intersection, do you as the applicant have any current jurisdiction to enact changes should we be, find those favorable for this project? Or how would that go about?
I guess I would defer to Scott. I don't know if we've got all the information with regard to the layout of the public way and where in that intersection MassDOT jurisdiction starts or stops. I don't know if we can have that answer, but we don't have any private ownership rights in any property on that side.
It's probably a combination of MassDOT and the town. Deerholm is a public way.
That's correct.
Is that it, Justin?
That was my things that came to mind so far.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, First, I only saw both these documents, the letter of or the whatever, from the 11th, and then the response today, late this afternoon. I don't know why the 11th didn't come to us sooner, but I couldn't begin to really analyze it carefully or fully understand it to be able to ask all my questions tonight. But I'll try to get at least a bit here. Let's see. There seemed to be a little bit of contention about sensitivity analysis, and I wasn't. Could somebody describe exactly what that means? I was looking for maybe a comparison between without the sensitivity and with it. I couldn't find that. I saw against current traffic, so and I think I saw no build. So maybe we can get a little explanation.
Yeah, through the chair, this is Bob Michaud again. The so-called sensitivity analysis is really simply an alternative analysis that would rely on a different variable to estimate trips, right? So the originally submitted application based its estimates on the square footage of the building and used trip rates that relate to building area. The second variable that the industry points to as potentially acceptable basis for estimating traffic is the number of employees that a site might have. And when you look at the trips that are generated under that variable, they are substantially higher than what was originally submitted in the report. So the so-called sensitivity analysis is simply using the employee-based variable to estimate trips, and then to use that higher estimate to identify impact, right? Level of service impact.
I thought I saw somewhere in the third document that came through recently from the applicants, some possible disagreement with the need for the sensitivity analysis. Now, I may have read that wrong, or maybe I just don't understand, but are we doing our analysis based on this new sensitivity analysis numbers at this point?
The current analysis and the mitigation that was outlined is based on the higher trip standard. And that higher trip standard would serve as the basis for monitoring, right? So there's a provision in the monitoring that says that once the facility opens, the actual trip performance gets measured. And if it's any greater than 10% higher than what was estimated using the employee variable, that the applicant would then need to consider the potential need for additional mitigation actions if that happened.
Yeah, and that gets me to another of the questions, which is I think I saw there's supposed to be a study, and apparently the study goes 5 years before you see the results.
I believe, and Scott can clarify as well, that monitoring would occur annually for a 5-year period. And that's actually a standard that's established by Mass DOT. That's a typical requirement of projects that would be subject to NEPA review and Mass DOT permitting. So I think the intent of the applicant here is to demonstrate that they'll monitor in accordance with the standard Mass DOT protocol for up to the 5-year period.
The report said, I think somewhere in there I saw that the report would come to the town of Grafton. I would hope that the planning board would see it. But that brings me to the other question of how does the thing is built, it's in operation, the special permits a few years ago. How does any additional mitigation get done?
Yeah, and Scott again can clarify this, but the project is in fact subject to NEPA filing. I believe that may have already occurred, correct, Scott?
Right.
And in the ordinary course, in the review of a project, Mass DOT would, I'm not sure that this was the case, Scott, but I don't believe this was subject to a Section 61 finding, correct? This is
Correct.
simply E&F, yeah. So I think in the review of the materials, Mass DOT most likely identified, its primary concerns relative to state highway locations. Because this was not subject to any further action beyond the environmental notification form, the subsequent mitigation document, we'll call it, known as the Section 61 finding, would not be issued in this case. So what I think the applicant is doing here is they're outlining a mitigation program and a monitoring program that complies with the standard requirements that Mass DOT would be looking for. That's the 5-year standard, and that would be a report that's filed with the town and presumably filed with the planning board. So to the extent an exceedance of the trips is established, that the applicant would then have to re-engage in discussions with the town through the planning board to determine the need for any additional action. So for instance, if trips were 50 or 100 vehicles per hour higher than what actually is estimated in the report, that would represent a substantial material increase that could affect the need for additional signal retiming, lane extensions, signal rephasing, things of that nature. And that's what that's for.
Paid for by the developer?
By the applicant,
By the
correct?
applicant. Yeah. And in addition to, if I can just jump in, Mr. Hassinger, in addition, the driveways are going to be subject to Mass DOT review and purview because they're coming out onto Mass DOT jurisdictional roadway. So they'll get a copy of the monitoring study as well. And if as Mr. Michaud indicates, there's a material increase, that's cause to come back and revisit the access permit through DOT.
But that's DOT. See, here's most of what you're talking about is the state, DOT, and what they think about their road. Now, they don't seem to be too concerned about the fact that the road is hopeless already. So certainly, what we hear from the public is a lot of concern, and we've even seen the conditions out there ourselves as being really bad. And it isn't, I don't think there's any intent on DOT's part to do anything about it at this point. So whether or not we could rely on DOT to address this at the level of the concerns that we hear from the folks in the town, I'm concerned about. And that's why I want to know what powers we have or would have to get any mitigation, correction, whatever.
Right, and through the chair again, I think the answer is that the applicant, as a condition of an approval for this project, would commit to the monitoring program and to revisiting mitigation to the extent thresholds are met. And that any obligation for mitigation to offset those additional impacts of the project would be within the purview of the town and would be paid for by the applicant. Mass DOT would certainly need to approve anything that's done within their jurisdiction. They own the roadway there, but the applicant would not be looking for Mass DOT to promote, fund, or implement those additional measures. Those would lie squarely with the applicant as a condition of any approvals.
I think that if we get to a decision around this, that we want to have it spelled out quite clearly what capabilities the town planning board have through this 5 years. And then the one other thing, which I think was mentioned a bit, is all of what's currently proposed is contingent on DOT okays, as I understand it. And I'm thinking that we shouldn't start building the thing until DOT has agreed. Because if we get to a point where they've told us before on other things down the road from this, no, you can't have a traffic light. No, you can't have whatever your process is bringing up on one of their roads. And I wouldn't want that to happen after an approval that was based on that was given. So I'm hoping that we can structure this that way. Hopefully Mass DOT gives that approval.
Through the chair, the concern is sorry, I was going to add through the chair, the concern is a fair one, but there are conditions which can be drafted to make it clear what place essentially the applicant needs to be at before pulling a building permit. So we can speak with Mr. McGoldrick about the language.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm looking for. After I get a chance to, I know. Which signals were you talking about making adjustments on? The turnpike entrance, I understand, but do you have any recommendations in all of this relative to the Bridge Street triangle?
Yeah, so it looks like a rephase or retiming to provide more green time to Bridge Street would accommodate at least would balance out some of the delays at that intersection. Now, that said, that intersection is in the middle of a 3 intersection coordinated system. So there may be some change. You may be limited as to how much additional green time can be provided to Bridge Street and still maintain some progression through that corridor on North Main Street. But it's, it certainly looks like it's like some, we recorded a level of service F under the existing conditions in the morning without any development there, with relatively minor delays on North Main Street. It seems like we could improve that F to something better with just some minor changes to the time. But again, that's something that would be the subject of an optimization study that we would do as a condition of the monitoring study.
This is coming from Bridge Street and turning one way or the other onto North Main Street. I'll say that my own experience is also, though, and maybe it's not directly in the line of this one, but where traffic is heading from North Main Street onto Worcester Street at that intersection, Quinsigamond Corner. I often feel that there's a timing issue there, that North Main Street's not getting enough time. You'll be sitting there at a red light and there's nobody out there running back. Now, to some degree though, I think that may come around to those signals are too old and they don't have the capabilities and they would need to be updated. Can you tell me anything about that?
I don't, offhand, we did get some signal plan information, and the plans themselves were I would say dated. So it could be that they haven't been updated in a while. I can tell you that it doesn't take much for I should say it does happen that coordinated systems fall out of coordination. And it's, but, until we would get into, the equipment, that's really about all I can say at this point.
I'm not at all sure how coordinated they are, or were even supposed to be. I was on the board when that went in and made a big, the lights there made a big improvement, but still, I'm curious, as long as we're there at Bridge Street, I have this page that shows two drawings next to each other about truck swings, pictures of red trucks going around. And I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to make out of that.
Right. So there was discussion, I believe, at the planning board hearing, the last hearing on this project, related to truck access onto Bridge Street and how it could be a difficult maneuver. And so at the North Main Street intersection, it shows that there's a potential conflict point, not really a potential, that there would be a conflict point for some of the largest tractor trailers making that left turn onto North Main Street. That could be rectified by pulling back the stop bar a little bit on the North Main Street southbound approach. That would move that, if any vehicles were, if they could stop a little bit earlier than where they do now, trucks would be able to make that maneuver without any issue. At the other end of Bridge Street, what you're looking at is the swept path of the truck where it goes onto Bridge Street, and it does have a couple conflict points with where it crosses the center line or crosses the shoulder lines. And, what we noticed is in the traffic counts, there's hardly anybody that makes that left turn maneuver from Bridge Street onto Worcester Street headed south, because they would do it at the North Main Street intersection. And we're not expecting any truck traffic to be making that maneuver either. But that's really just the intent of those exhibits, is to show you, it's really to answer the question that came up last time about the truck movement.
But the other movement, where you're coming off Worcester Street onto Bridge Street,
yeah.
Look, it is, I think if I read this correctly, quite a serious conflict. And obviously all those trucks that were trying to get to turn left onto North Main Street have made a left off Worcester Street to go down Bridge Street. So that's a bit of a, I'm not sure, I guess it's an issue, but I'm not sure what we do about it. I will say, I noticed the mention of move the stop line on North Main Street back 20 feet. It's already been moved back once, and and some of the lane on North Main Street, I guess headed towards Worcester Street, has been marked off to push you over, further away from the turn. Pushing back another 20 feet isn't going to be popular with the people who drive over there. Problem is, I think that's right where the bridge is, which is keeping us from getting 2 lanes to get, to solve some of that through North Main Street to Worcester Street and south, or whatever it is, towards the center. Okay, more than enough from that.
All right, Prabhu, did you have anything?
Yes, sir. I had a bunch of questions. 2 of them got addressed. One was on the road widening just now. Other one is an extension of the question. So what I'm trying to understand here, Mr. Fontaine and Misha, is how do we will understand this in terms of benefit analysis? That's where my questions are coming in from. So the first one I had was higher vehicle trips in the slide number 2 or slide number 1 that Mr. Thornton, you had talked about, based on the revised criteria of number of trips. Does that also clearly break down the higher number of trips for cars, passenger cars and trucks, or is it done?
In the report appendix, there is detailed information on the trip generation and the numbers of cars versus trucks. And there's also network diagrams in the appendix that clearly show how many of the movements are related to passenger cars and how many are related to trucks.
And that would give, I haven't gone into those details, so I would read up prior to the next meeting. So that number of trucks equal the volume of those, that would show us how many during the peak period, how many trucks are going to get to the facility, and how many would be getting out, and so on and so forth, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And the other one was, I asked in the last meeting about the passenger car equivalency. Was that calculated? Was that included? One truck equivalent to 4 cars or 6 cars or something of that kind?
So the passenger car equivalent was included in the analysis. I do remember you making that comment, and I don't think that we provided definition or explanation of how it was calculated, but it was incorporated into the analysis. So if you look on the analysis, and Mr. Michaud can verify this or can review it as well. The truck vehicle percentage for the different movements changes going from the no build to the build condition.
And is that in the revised one? It was not there in the original. Okay. Mr. Michaud, did you want to weigh in on that?
No, I think that's correctly said, that the analysis includes truck percentages for each of the movements at each intersection. And that actually in the modeling gets calculated to passenger car equivalents, PCEs, to ensure that the effect of the truck activity is accounted for in the analysis. So that is part of the analysis.
Okay, I'll review that. My last 2 more questions. The other next one was, in terms of modeling, do we have in your revised report or revised input, Mr. Tom, do we have the modeling? Is that what you are referring to, overall traffic diagrams, volumes, and so on and so forth? Is that the model, the revised traffic model?
Yes, yes.
Okay. My last question is probably more for Chris and Dave. And still, for any decision making from a future state point of view, I'm trying to understand what is the cost benefit analysis. Towards that end, I asked the last time in a couple of other conversations, there were more folks saying you shouldn't be worried about it, but I don't know. Having something either quantified or qualified, it'll help in making this decision when we arrive to that point. But who's going to help us drive this? And where I'm going with the question is, if with this facility, if the town is going to get $1 million revenue, are we going to be spending $5 million to get that $1 million revenue? Are we going to be spending $500,000? Who's going to help us? Is anyone going to even help us? Or is there something completely outside the purview of our planning board? And should I go and ask someone else?
So I think the applicant provided kind of a benefit analysis, what I would say is, and quantified some of the tax revenues to be considered in terms of this project. So I think that's very succinct in looking at some of the broader picture impacts of the project. In terms of, typical financial impacts to the town that a development like this you would consider, is potential for maintenance of any, when we're looking at road widening and things like that, what would the impacts of that be for the finances of the town? But in this case, being a Mass DOT road, my understanding is that any kind of maintenance or redevelopment would be included in the Mass DOT budget and not necessarily impact, at least directly, the town. So that's certainly one of the major ones I think that we would look at. But you know, we can delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I would, I would just follow that up by saying that it's often difficult to quantify the costs, but we can make some attempt, and I think we as a board, I don't know that we have any outside consultants or agencies that would ordinarily help out with something like this. We as a board could reach out to some of the other town departments. We could reach out to DPW, to police and fire, and other departments to have them tell us whether they see any potentially quantifiable costs associated with this. So I think to whatever extent that factors into the criteria for the board's findings on a special permit, we can certainly reach out to other town agencies to the extent that we can identify information that they might be able to provide to us to help us come to a decision. That's a little bit. It's a little bit more nebulous, and as I said, a number of components of a cost-benefit analysis are difficult or impossible to quantify. But to the extent that we can, with some help from other departments, quantify something, we can certainly reach out and try.
And
It's a little hard for me to come up with very much cost this imposes on the town. I would think most of the ongoing operating costs would be relative to Route 122. And if I'm not mistaken, the state does basically pays for all of that, plowing, on those occasions when they make repairs. That's all, unlike our town roads, where the town is gonna be taking on possibly added maintenance. I don't think that there's much okay.
Yeah, we can follow that discussion up.
I'm not sure that there's a whole lot that's gonna come up on the town side. It'd be interesting to see though.
Right, but yes, that is a topic that we can take under consideration at some point in this process. Anything else, Prabhu?
I'm good, sir. Thank you.
Linda, do you have anything?
Were you saying something?
Linda, did you have anything to say?
No,
Okay. Well, I have a couple of observations of my own on the topic of traffic, and then unless there's something else, we can maybe for the moment sort of wrap that one up. As Bob noted, we just got the information this afternoon, the traffic study and the peer review, and it'll take some time for us board members to digest all of that. I certainly appreciate getting the information and what you guys have explained to us, and a lot of the details. Yeah, there's a lot of numbers and tables and charts and graphs that I certainly intend to take some time to going through trying to digest it all. But a couple of things that sort of stood out to me initially is the idea of having the truck traffic exit through the west driveway. Particularly since it's anticipated that most of the truck traffic will be entering from and exiting to the west towards the Mass Pike and Route 20. That strikes me as being it's a really attractive idea, and I might even suggest going further that sort of the circulation of truck traffic. It looks kind of convenient if the truck traffic all enters into the east driveway and basically circles around and exits out of the west driveway. Now, not just to have exiting from the west as an option, but it seems like it might make the truck circulation flow more smoothly if that was the path for all truck traffic. And it has the advantage of removing approximately half of the truck traffic from in front of the houses on Maplewood and Fairlawn and Worcester Street. Because if the truck traffic all exits out of the west driveway, then they're they're passing in front of the houses to go into the site, but then they're coming out back onto Worcester Street past the end of the houses. So that can't help but be more attractive to the residents there than having all the truck traffic flow in both directions onto their houses, which suggests another possibility, which may not be quite so attractive from a circulation point of view, and that's to have all the truck traffic enter and exit from the west driveway, completely taking the truck traffic away from in front of the houses. I don't know if you guys considered that at all in the design, and I can see sort of merits to both ways, but to the extent that what I did read this afternoon and saw, the idea of the truck circulation basically going around the building, and rather than having the trucks turn around and back and then go back out on the east, seems like it's an attractive idea. I don't think, and Scott, and you could sort of take a look at that, but I suspect that would, directing all exiting traffic out the west, would slightly change the numbers on the turning movements there, but it probably would not significantly affect the impact overall of the project on traffic. So I would certainly suggest that you consider directing all the truck traffic out through the west driveway, if that turns out to be. I know you recommended, you expect a lot of that to be done, but I think I might recommend a little bit more strongly that be the entirety. And again, some consideration of of all truck traffic in and out going through the west driveway. Again, you may have considered that and decided that wasn't good. It would be helpful for me to know that, that sort of these various different options have been evaluated and the one that's overall best has been chosen. So that's just, at this point, that's just sort of food for thought and an observation.
Do you want an initial response from Scott? Because we've spent a lot of time looking at that west driveway, so.
Yes, I mean, if you can speak to that now, great. If not, I'll expect an answer whenever you do.
Yeah, sure, if I could. We did spend some time looking at that very issue, and a couple things came up. One is that there are wetlands just to the west that impact that go right up to the edge of Worcester Street, which would be impacted if we were to do the similar type of widening to provide a left turn lane into that western drive, which is what would be required there to accommodate that maneuver.
Scott,
a left turn lane at one location,
Scott,
and then another left turn lane downstream. You have sort of an hourglass type of design,
Scott,
which is not favorably looked on by Mass DOT, and really it's not a great idea in design in general.
I think, Scott, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do mean to interrupt. I don't mean that. So, I think the inquiry is exiting traffic only, being directed to the west hand.
Well, no, to clarify that, Scott is addressing the idea of, which I did raise as a possibility, that was one of the things that occurred to me, was that truck traffic in both directions be the west driveway. But I see very clearly Scott's point about the difficulty of, because you would have to provide the left turn lane there as well. And there are site constraints that basically make that difficult or impossible or impractical. So that's sort of a key to me. That's kind of a key driver of saying that the entering in truck traffic entering on the west is probably not going to work.
Right.
Right, and by moving them to the east driveway, you're absolutely right. We do have that progression, that counterclockwise progression, and the left turn lane can be sized appropriately to accommodate the traffic that would want to be entering the site.
Yeah, because you want that left turn lane to have enough storage capacity to, if you have several trucks waiting to make the left turn, you don't want them to, go out into the travel lane.
Right.
So, the other part of the other part of the question is more the question of, is it feasible to basically say that all of the truck traffic should be exiting through the west driveway?
Yeah, and I think we can say that for our traffic, but it's something that we can take a closer look at for the site in general.
Yep. Yeah.
Through the chair, I just clarifying question. That is, my understanding of how this site might work is that any arriving truck would need to check in through the guard gate as a practical matter, right? So I think the site currently is designed to facilitate that check-in process through the so-called guardhouse, and then to proceed to the loading spaces and then exiting at the west driveway. So I think there's some logic to how this is laid out.
Yep.
So that's just another observation I had to the discussion.
Yeah, that's kind of consistent with what I was thinking, that sort of the ideal flow for truck traffic would be to, enter on the east, check in, as you pointed out, through whatever process, stop at the, park at the dock, load and unload, and then on exit, instead of turning back to the east, on the exit would just continue the flow to the west in that counterclockwise direction. So I guess that's probably all that we need to. I just wanted to sort of to clarify that and to sort of suggest that that exiting to the west be not so much. It's kind of expressed as an option in the documentation that I read today, and it's it might be a little bit stronger to basically make that a requirement or to very strongly encourage it. Mm-hmm. It also. By not having trucks exit from the east driveway, they would most likely be exiting from the east driveway because they would want to be turning to the east. And that would be a left turn for a truck. That would be a left turn out of the east driveway onto Worcester Street, which is more likely to encounter conflicts and slowdowns than exiting. If you are exiting out of the west driveway and making the left turn, you're not then coming into conflict with traffic waiting to enter the same driveway, or the truck traffic in particular. So it seems to me like it facilitates a little bit smoother flow to more strongly state that that's really the preferred, or that perhaps the required direction of truck traffic flow.
Steve, we have some people that want to talk.
And let me see.
No.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if I had any other comments on traffic for tonight. And no, that's really it, aside from what's already been said. And like I said before, I think we all would, are going to take some time to more fully digest this. I'm sure there are a lot of details that I want to be able to get out of this. So, anything else from the board? Any other?
There was a raised hand, but I think it just went away.
Yeah, I don't see a raised hand at the moment. So if that's it, if nobody has any questions about the latest traffic information?
I had my hand raised at Devney.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
and then it went away for some reason.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, thank you. Thanks for taking my question. My concern is with the pressure of trucks and the realities of truckers facing traffic westbound, that there would be an increase of 18-wheeler traffic eastbound, and that eastbound traffic would not exit over Bridge Street, but would instead follow 140 through the Grafton Green and, maybe bypass the Mass Pike going 140 to say 495. So I live at 6 South Street, and I've had 5 years to have kind of a sensitivity test. And over the last 5 years, I've noticed an increased number of 18-wheelers, in fact, coming north and south on 140 through the Grafton Green. I don't know what the reason for that is, but I wonder if it's, algorithms that, from 495, for example, that could come 140 and bypass going all the way up to the Mass Pike. So I wonder if there's a need to really investigate the assumptions that the traffic eastbound leaving or eastbound arriving is really going to be minimal. And if it's not, the impact on the center of our town and then our town roads and the roads like 140 would be impacted greatly, particularly if there's pressure for traffic for the trucks and maybe even financial pressure to avoid tolls or to shorten distances for the trucks.
I will note that our MDM had, among their recommendations in their follow-up letter that we just got today, did include a recommendation that the applicant require that all truck traffic enter from and exit to the west. Basically, and I don't know, that this is something that will require a little bit of further thought, I think, as to whether that's practical. But ideally, if all the truck traffic is directed to and from the Mass Pike and Route 20, that will, that would pretty much eliminate that as a concern. But again, and also in the traffic study, they did do some more detailed analysis of, and I forget the term off the top of my head, but where the traffic is likely to be going to and coming from. So that it's a consideration. Not the first time we've heard it, and I think we'll want to make sure we keep that in mind, and just try to if anything try to sort of vet the assumption that the majority of the truck traffic will be flowing to and from the west. And again, just in the interest of time, also it is getting late, and I would remind the public that's attending this hearing that everything, all of the questions, concerns, and issues that you have previously raised in these discussions is a matter of record. So I really want to avoid repeating things that have already been said to the board. We've got it all on record, and it will all be taken into account when the board prepares a decision on this. So I'm really, it's important for, again, in the interest of time, everybody's time, to raise questions and make comments based on new information, any new information that happens to have come up. So, having said all that, and again, we're still primarily on the topic of traffic. I see some raised hands, one in the room here and a couple more on Zoom. I'll take the one in the room. If you can step forward. This is not quite our ordinary situation in terms of a place where everybody can hear you. I don't know.
If you want to sit at the chair, just try to project your voice a little bit so that the owl picks it up. Sorry about the
that's
audio
okay.
today.
I know you were displaced tonight. My name is Amy Thornton. I at 15 Maplewood, directly across the street from Wyman Gordon's. And I just have two quick things on traffic. I don't want to repeat, but I want to reiterate that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're.
Okay, I'll talk louder. I just want to reiterate that there really doesn't seem any way that you can make sure that the traffic is coming and going from the Mass Pike. I don't want to be repetitive, but I don't understand how that can be demanded and then monitored in any way. There were 2 accidents just this weekend on that stretch of Worcester Street.
Dave?
You still can't hear me?
Yeah, I think we're still having trouble. If you...
Do you want me to, I mean, I also can send an email. I can send it.
You just comes up.
Sorry about
Bring your chair up to the owl.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I'll switch it.
It's this thing.
Oh. Okay, sorry. Okay, so Bob, can you hear me now? I don't know.
Bob, are you able to hear us now?
I hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm at 15 Maplewood. My name is Amy Thornton, and I just have two quick comments. One, which I had just mentioned, that this weekend alone, there were 2 accidents from Hilltop to before the post office. There were 2 accidents in basically a day and a half. So that stretch is already a problem, which you all know. So the second thing that I wanted to say is that, is there anybody who's going to do peer reviews of the monitoring that goes on? Because we've learned tonight that the original traffic study was under by more than double of what is actually there. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the monitoring that will happen. I mean, I don't know how we're gonna know if that's an accurate number or not.
To that, I can just say that the board will specify in the conditions of the decision, assuming that this gets approved, if it were to be approved. In the conditions of the decision, the board would spell out the conditions of the monitoring, what monitoring is done, how it is monitored, and so the board will take that concern into account.
Okay, thank you. The last thing, Bob, which I don't know if you or Linda had heard, I just was reiterating the fact that truck traffic all the time comes out of town. So I don't know how they can assume or say that all the traffic is coming and going from the Mass Pike. I think there's going to be trucks, unless you say that they can't, taking a left out of the west entrance. So I know we've already talked about it, but that's a big concern, that the traffic is not strictly going to come from the Mass Pike or Route 20, because it doesn't now.
That will be taken into consideration,
Okay.
that question.
Okay, thank you.
I have another hand raised on Zoom from Rosemarie Belanger.
Yeah, here.
Rosemarie Belanger, 10 Fairlawn Street. I have one question for Scott and one question for Bob Michaud. And I'll ask the question of Scott first. Scott, when you looked at the Bellingham warehouse, how many truck bays does that facility have?
I would have to get that number. I believe the 355 Maple Street has 70, but I can get that number. I can get those numbers for you.
Yeah, I would just think, I mean, I'm a layperson, a business person. I would think that you would want, to do a parity of the amount of truck bays. So thank you for collecting that. Bob Michaud.
I can, actually, if I could just follow up. One thing that we did notice is that the number of truck bays doesn't really have that much input into the total trip generation, because there are some bays that don't get used. There are some bays that get used quite frequently. So, and I think that's why the ITE trip generation methodology doesn't rely on the number of truck bays as a variable. It relies on building area, square footage, and the number of employees. But I just wanted to add that information.
No, I appreciate the fact that you want to educate me about that, but I think that if we could get a sense of how many truck bays for 244 are going to be used and how many are going to be passive, I think that would give us greater confidence about the traffic report for 18-wheelers in specific. But thank you, Scott. My second question is for Bob Michaud. Bob, why don't they consider truck bay usage in traffic reports? We've documented the number of trips in, using, local warehouse statistics of the number of bays and the trips in our own, kind of crude way. But why wouldn't they consider truck bay usage in the traffic reports, particularly since truck traffic is so much more negative than passenger traffic for emissions and so forth?
Sure. What I can say about industrial uses generally is that they vary widely in terms of how those dock spaces are used. If you take one of the more prototypical Home Depot distribution facility, for instance, they'll have many dock spaces that would give the appearance that those facilities would generate a lot of truck traffic, when in reality, there's a staging process that particular entity uses to store, repalletize, reload, and distribute its goods. And so each dock really, can vary very significantly depending on who the tenant is and how they conduct their business. So the use of dock spaces as a variable is not a good one because of that variability, whereas ITE acknowledges square footage and employees as appropriate variables to calculate trips because they're more consistent. That's why those two variables are used. It's principally a consistency issue. Dock spaces, based on sheer number, can vary quite a bit. In a traditional warehouse distribution facility, ITE does have the ability in its trip rates to calculate what percentage of trips are truck related. And the applicant in this case has applied that in trip generation and how it's done its analysis. But to use that as a sole basis, the docks as a sole basis for estimating all of the trips from the facility would not be appropriate based on that variability.
Okay, that's a great, both of you, thank you for that. I think that brings up another point, how much of the dock space the end user will use and whether or not the truck traffic is going to have to be, modified. I think that's going to be something that I'm going to be looking at very carefully, mainly because I'm very, very concerned about the diesel emissions. So I'm going to really want to hone in on what percentage of those bays are going to be used, and then the committee will redo our calculations based upon that end user, and maybe it's two or three different scenarios. If it's this user, they're going to use 40. If it's this user, they're going to use 70, so on and so forth. But I want to give other folks time to chat. Thank you for your explanation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bob, you have your hand up? Bob? I see Bob's hand raised. I don't know if he can hear me.
Yeah, I just heard you. That reminds me, the diesel emissions. I think I asked a question back previously about whether, or quantifying how much trucks would be left running while they're in the facility rather than being shut down. Because all the time they're running, they're emitting whatever pollution. I don't think I heard any answer to that, but we may want to be having some sort of an idea about that and maybe conditions about it based on what we hear.
Okay, I have one more hand raised.
I hear you, Dave.
One more hand raised on Zoom. That would be Melissa Graves.
Muted.
Sorry, trying. Is that better?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Whether
Okay.
you can hear me or
My
not is another
question is about the introduction of the sidewalk on Maplewood Drive. At first glance, it sounds like a lovely addition, but when you look at that stretch, it's at like an incline from the main road, and there's a lovely set of trees down the center. So my question is the sidewalk proposed to be out north of so out into the existing street, and then the street begins after the sidewalk, or are you taking away from the green space that exists, possibly impacting the trees, and possibly also needing a retaining wall because of the slope?
Yeah, so I can answer that. We are proposing to cut into the buffer to some extent to fit the sidewalk in. And there may be we'll check with our landscape architect to see what we can do to minimize any destruction of the trees. But the idea is to primarily maintain the alignment of Worcester Street and still be able to fit the sidewalk in on the south side of the street.
Because you also said you wanted to maintain a 5-foot shoulder. What is the current size of the shoulder on that side of the road?
I think it varies, probably 2 to 4 feet. So there's a lot of pushing of the roadway north into the site to accommodate the bike.
Yeah, so with a shoulder and a sidewalk, I worry about how much is being cut out of that beautiful area. I mean, it's one of the first nice things you see when you drive into Grafton from that area is that like lovely set of trees in that street. And I think the neighbors would not, I don't live near there, but I don't think they would want that lost in this at all.
Yeah, I would venture to say that what we're talking about tonight is a concept plan, that none of the detailed design work has been done, probably been done yet. So a lot of those kind of details remain to be worked out, and ultimately, in the worst case, it could turn out that, well, it was a nice idea, but we really can't do it. You just don't know. Chris, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to note, and the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's also the intention to, within that existing green space that's being discussed, actually add additional landscaping elements and plantings to provide additional buffering. So even if there is a need to disrupt some of the trees, obviously that can be incorporated into a more detailed landscape plan to either minimize or kind of relocate those impacts.
Yeah, I would point out at this point that the time is approximately 9:43 p.m. The board will need to take a vote to continue the meeting past 10 o'clock if we so choose. Also, in the interest of time, I think, given that the board is going to need time to digest the traffic information, the traffic reports that we have received, it's clear that we will have to continue this hearing to a future time, and thus some of the discussion that we might otherwise have tonight could also be reasonably deferred to a near future meeting. I don't want to put it off too long, but it's already a given that we're going to have to continue to at least one more hearing, which will give an opportunity for further discussion. Justin?
All right, so one thing I just wanted to point out for the applicant that I just noticed in case they weren't aware, just happened to be looking at Google Maps on the actual drive up into Grafton where that sidewalk will go in next to Maplewood. And we have the Welcome to Grafton sign that looks to be almost the full width of that green space. I don't know what actual laws are required for that sign, but I just wanted to point out that I see it there. That's
I move that we vote to go past 10 o'clock. We're closing in on it.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board vote to continue this meeting past 10 o'clock. With no discussion, I'll call for a vote. Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried. We can keep going past 10.
Goody.
So, are we done for the moment with traffic? Again, as a reminder, I see a hand in the back. But as a reminder, we will have ample time to discuss this at the next round. We do have one hand raised in the back of the room here.
Hi, Leanne Gagnon, 17 Maplewood Drive. I will keep it very brief. I wish that we could raise our hands while you're talking because you tend to forget. First question, Wyman Gordon trucks. Are they going in east or west?
Wyman Gordon trucks?
Yes, because that's not part of the discussion when we were talking about everybody exiting or entering, everybody on the west side. And you said they couldn't go in that way. Well, the traffic study said that. But I thought Wyman Gordon trucks was still using that.
Yeah, Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember reading that the Wyman Gordon traffic will be using the west driveway.
So, right, so the Wyman Gordon trucks are currently using the east driveway. And the Wyman Gordon employees are using the west driveway.
Okay, so all truck traffic is east and hopefully exiting west. For Wyman and the new
Yeah, the project-
warehouse.
Truck traffic, yes.
Yes, okay.
The project traffic would be entering at the east and exiting through the west.
Okay, and my second question is about the DOT. If the DOT, this is for the planning board, says no turning lane, does that make this project null and void? Would that cancel this?
So no, I think if Mass DOT found that the turning lane was not amenable, we would come back and deliberate with the applicant on modifications that would be amenable and that would fit Mass DOT criteria. If that's the case, I think that's fairly unlikely, given the improvements that are proposed, but.
I know I've seen in other towns where DOT has said, no, we won't put a traffic light there, so projects don't go forward. So if they say no to this, it could still potentially go forward, maybe with a light. Would there be, what other traffic improvements could happen without a turning lane?
I think we would cross that bridge if we came to it.
If we get there, okay. And I just want to say thank you. You guys do not have an easy job on this one. Thank you.
Good evening. Jim Shannon, Brigham Hill Road. On the traffic issues only, just a couple of quick comments. It was noted that, or it was mentioned that you'd have to change the timing in the Millbury lights at the Mass Pike if traffic became congested in front of the facility. Don't forget, you would also have to change the light timing on Wheelock Ave because those two are in sync. Now, I'm not sure whether those are both controlled by the state, or one of them is controlled by Millbury, and the Mass Pike one controlled by the state. But now we're getting outside of the jurisdiction of Grafton and asking Millbury and/or the state to deal with Millbury for our benefit.
I'm not sure that those things are benefiting us. They're necessities brought on by the traffic for the project, and they're being noted. Turnpike or Millbury is gonna have to get some action there, as well as us.
That's my point, Bob.
It doesn't change what happens in Grafton, particularly if the lights get retimed up at the Turnpike entrance. Does it?
Through the chair, Bob Michaud, I think there's an inherent connection between Grafton and the signal in Millbury at the interchange. If that signal doesn't work properly, you're gonna have an awfully long queue on Worcester Street that backs into Grafton, right? So you're inextricably linked, like it or not. And I think the basis of the monitoring and the commitment by the applicant would be to ensure that that doesn't happen as a function of its project. So, and ultimately, Mass DOT would need to approve any change that's made because they own that signal. But I don't think that, it would be a problem. It wouldn't be problematic to pursue that, even though the signal isn't physically located within Millbury. Within Grafton, I'm sorry.
How far is it from the town line to that intersection? Any idea?
3/4 of a mile,
I'd have to look that up.
maybe a little bit longer, 3/4 to a mile,
A mile?
maximum.
We're probably not gonna see backups of a mile, although I wouldn't promise.
But it really is a gateway to Grafton, though.
No, but you've got all, yeah, but you've got all of the traffic as we're talking coming out of the west gate, turning right, heading toward the Mass Pike. How many trucks does it take to back up along with the regular car traffic? Because I've been there backed up to the Grafton line at times,
Yeah.
as it is now, and
To Mr. Strandon's point, Bob, I'll just say that I know within the last 4 or 5 months, there's been at least 2 times. I don't drive this direction that often, but there's been at least 2 times during peak hours. I have been sitting in a stopped traffic line in Grafton on this road.
Okay. You just don't go there.
Yeah, you had another question or a point?
I have some other questions, but if this were you had said specifically traffic questions.
Yeah, I think I want to try to wrap up our traffic discussion, and then we can move on to some other topics. And again, if we don't get to everything tonight that we want to, we will have additional opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see any more hands raised on Zoom or in the room. If we've nothing more on traffic, I think, Attorney Donahue, you had 1 or 2 other topics for consideration tonight?
Well, up there.
And I know we have one piece of paperwork to take care of before we're done.
Hopefully we'll be in A next time.
If you had ended at 10, we could have got that done. I do have one other thing we should do because he's here this evening and maybe we can finish it for the purpose of the entire hearing. And that deals with the landscaping and buffering. There's been some issues raised with regard to it. It's been modified a couple of times, and Nicholas Campanelli is here as landscape architect, can review that. And part and parcel of that is some of the work along Maplewood that we were asked to look at for buffering. I think a little bit of that's what people actually want to see. So at some point, we're going to have to get some feedback on that in some fashion. So, Nick, I think you've got a couple of slides that maybe you can show and walk through what type of changes that you've made to the plan since the last time we talked.
I do. Do I have permission to share the screen?
Yep.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Is that a yes? I haven't heard.
Yes.
I didn't hear
Yes.
For the record, again, my name is Nicholas Campanelli. I'm with MDLA. I'm getting some pretty good feedback on my end. I think it's gone. This is not the night for technology. One last time, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Not sure who's heard what, so I'm going to say once again for the record, my name is Nicholas Campanelli with MDLA. I'm a landscape architect for the project. I want to start with a quick overview. This is really a key plan for the project, split into 6 different sections for the sake of documenting. I'll do a quick kind of overview for the project, then I'll dive into a quick little detail for some of the screening enhancements that we've proposed along Worcester Street. And then, as was recently just hinted, we can talk about Maplewood and what the proposed screening could look like. Again, it's conceptual along Maplewood. So what I've done for the sake of zooming in on this project to discuss the landscaping in a little more detail than looking at the overview plan is I've provided a key plan off to the side here for all 6 of these slides. This particular sheet focuses on the northwest corner of the property. And it might be beneficial for Sam and I to tag team this because there's a little bit of site layout. That's some adjustments we've made around the proposed building. Some of these parking lots have changed in nature and shape. We've actually reduced the parking on the western side of the building, and I can show you once we get to the last slide on this section how we've kind of mitigated or proposed landscaping to buffer from Worcester Street. But the back northwest corner, standard parking spaces that are flanked by lawn and a couple different trees. We've got some honey locust internal to the parking lot and a variety of maples and oaks that line the entry drive on the western entry. As we swing around the back, it's the buffer where we start to buffer against Wyman Gordon. This is on the back side of the loading docks. We've got some ornamental tree buffers, and then the main design objective back here is to landscape the detention basins. So we've got some slope stabilization meadow and wetland meadow, a combination of the two proposed for this back space. The second slide is the back center portion of the property. Again, moving from west to east, it's a continuation of the buffer in the meadow mix along the proposed detention system, and then a more robust buffer along the back portion of the property directly adjacent to the Wyman Gordon office space. As we move further east on the property to the northeast corner, again, this evergreen buffer, which is a combination of Fraser fir, Norway spruce, and arborvitae, continues east on the property. As we turn north, again, we have another detention basin that continues around. We've got the meadow mix, combination of a slope mix and a wet meadow mix to service this, so that we're not looking at a bland or just otherwise highly maintained landscape within these basins. The intent is to have them low maintenance, but function and aesthetically in a manner that's, we want it to look nice. That's the intent. As we swing down, this is the truck entry from the east driveway. Right now, we're fairly open, concentrating the majority of the trees and buffering around the parking lot. And I'll swing around to the Worcester Street side portion of the property. Again, we're now on the southeast corner. This is essentially the main pedestrian entry to the building. We're really providing a lot of landscape enhancements along this front end. The sidewalk is offset from the building to allow foundation plantings. We've got a combination of medium, small shrubs, perennials, ornamental grasses that line the eastern facade. Those plantings then run along the southern facade along Worcester Street between a sidewalk that's again offset from the building. We don't want a sidewalk tight to the building. We're trying to provide green tight to the building where possible to give a green buffer. I'll get into more detail about the buffer enhancements after we finish kind of the overview. But to finish the sentiment and the thought regarding the main parking lot, you can see particularly on the south side of the parking lot, we're really trying to dress this up so that views from Worcester Street will form a little bit of a buffer between the parking lot and the road. While I'm here, I'll offer the one comment regarding the lighting. I know in past hearings, there's been concern about light bleed off from the property. The entire time we've been proposing this project, and we continue to do so. The light fixtures are fully dark sky compliant with full cutoffs. There'll be no light bleed from the property. The photometrics, the calculations essentially hit zero once they hit the property line. And that's something we will continue to maintain pending any further modifications. So what that means specifically along these driveways in particular is that the light fixtures face in, they don't face out, and the back side of the fixture literally has a cutoff that doesn't allow that light bleed off the property. So that's a practice that's pretty common nowadays. It's really pretty rare to find fixtures that aren't dark sky compliant. So again, as we're now on the bottom or the south center portion of the property, we're only running along Worcester. Again, that vegetated buffer against the building with the sidewalk offset continues. We've got split islands that run along Worcester Street. Again, I'll get into the planting detail about specific species in a few minutes, but the idea is to create a variety of plants along this edge, not a monoculture of one species. So we've got shade trees, we've got evergreens, we've got medium shrubs, low shrubs, and perennials. Again, I'll get into more details, but you start to see how we're trying to create a rhythm that's not a regular rhythm along Worcester Street. We want a variety of interests as you move along the street. And to wrap up the overview for the main kind of landscape conversation for the property, again at the southwest corner, this is one move where this is essentially a phase 2 parking lot. While phase 1, the idea is that we're providing a meadow at this location as a buffer from the back parking lot to a secondary pedestrian entry. Plenty of buffer. You won't even see that parking lot from Worcester Street between the amount of trees that we're planting, the meadow, et cetera. Again, the sidewalk continues east to west, running on the property. In this plant bed, I'd like you to pay attention to that as I transition over to this slide, which then takes you into and gives you a sense of the specific species that we're proposing for these islands. So I've tried to color code this to make life, the conversation much more simpler. The lime green are the shade trees. Again, the idea in this is we're creating a layered effect with the buffer against Worcester Street to the building. And what I mean by layered is we want colors that, we want blooming periods that vary throughout the year. We want heights that vary so that as you move down the street, there's different, we don't want to block the building entirely. We want to take advantage of this facade. It's going to be one of the, we'll call it the A facade on the building, right? We want to accentuate portions of the architecture. We want landscaping that works with the architecture. We don't want to block it entirely. We want to create a rhythm along the road that plays off of that architecture. So we want to see portions of it. We want to hide portions of it. That's what this landscape plays off of. So to that notion, we've got shade trees that are taller. They'll go in 20 to 25 feet tall, grow 3 to 4 feet per year. Those trees are red maples and scarlet oaks, represented by the lime green circles. As we move the next step down, we have the ornamental trees, which are serviceberry and eastern redbuds. While they're smaller trees, they're lower branching. So again, they provide a buffer to and from the building, no different than the evergreen trees that are represented by the dark circles. Those dark circles, again, 10 to 12 foot evergreen trees, Fraser fir, Norway spruce, arborvitae, the same buffer variety that we're using on the rear of the building against the Wyman Gordon facility. We want to bring that same plant material out to Worcester Street. And we're intentionally, again, using multiple species so that we don't have a monoculture. Say there's a disease or something comes down where we don't want to wipe out all the plants. We do this intentionally. The next layer down, large shrubs, which is represented by the medium green color. These are your white azaleas, Nova Zembla rhododendron, dwarf fothergilla. Again, a mix of majority of evergreens with a combination, a small insert of some deciduous, variety in color, variety in blooming periods, variety in size. The next layer down, the small shrubs. These are Arctic fire dogwoods, inkberries, yews, smaller shrubs, again, a combination evergreen and deciduous. And what's represented by the purple are the ornamental grasses and perennials. I don't want to suggest that every perennial is purple, I'm just using that purely for graphic purposes in this graphic. Purple coneflower, fountain grass, Russian sage, black-eyed Susan, and little blue stem are some of the perennials that we're proposing along this edge. So I did this graphic as an example. The intent is to take this palette and move it all the way down Worcester Street on these plant beds that vary in size and scale. And to wrap up my portion of the presentation, and then I'll be around for questions. We did this very quickly, but the idea is to suggest what a buffer could look like on Maplewood Drive. My apologies for getting the resident's name. That she had the comment regarding the sidewalk and the potential to disturb the existing trees. We're not looking to do that. We're actually looking to supplement that buffer. We would never want to be proposing anything that would compromise the existing plant material along that road, because I'm in full agreement. They're beautiful trees, they're healthy, there's no reason to get rid of them. So the intent is to buffer that. Again, we recognize that the homes opposite of Maplewood Drive, they're up higher than both Maplewood and Worcester Street. So we would need to supplement with more shade trees to provide that buffer up at a higher elevation. In addition to that, down at the ground level, we could do our typical arbor or evergreen screen with some lower plants to provide some ground cover along that edge as well. So the intent is to put the sidewalk on the Worcester side of the road with a buffer on the Maplewood side. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that's a lot to digest in 5 minutes. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Anybody from the board have any questions?
So, and whatever highway, what comes off the highways, is all that material good at dealing with it?
That's the intent. We want low maintenance material. So, so like the azaleas, the rhododendron, they love acidic soils. A lot of the plant material, like the perennials, you naturally lose a percentage of those each winter. The idea is to minimize that replacement, but we also need to be realistic and recognize that not every plant is bulletproof when it comes to kind of the salt and natural tolerance we take in winter.
But yeah, the other thing I thought about, you mentioned dark sky, the lights. I understand that they should be cut off, sharply cut off, so that they don't shine. You can't see the light source from the road or across the street, but the light reflects on the building, and so you've got a more. How bright a building are you looking towards?
So all the fixtures within the parking lot. So none of the light should be actually reflecting off the building. We are going to have building mounted fixtures, but the light orientation, particularly, I'm just going to use the east facade as an example, is going to be directed out towards the parking lot. The pole fixtures, we've, based off comments from the last hearing, we actually lowered the pole heights to reduce the potential for glare. So by the time these light levels actually get to the building, they're minimal. What I mean by that is they're actually offset by the fixtures on the building that are shooting backwards. So you really won't be getting any glare off the actual building because the light will be coming from the building out towards the parking lot, particularly along the facades. And that's true really around all 4 facades on this building.
Yeah, I'm mostly thinking of the street side, not the ends. Right now you have a dark field and then some lights, however far back it is on the Wyman Gordon buildings, which they made brighter not too long ago.
Yep.
But you have lights shining on the street side.
We do. They're a little hard to see in this plan, but at each of the entries, there's doors every so often along this. It's basically low-level security lighting along this edge of the building. So we don't have any floodlights per se, kind of broadcasting over the lawn along Worcester Street.
Okay, I think the Wyman Gordon situation now is broad light. They seem to be lighting the whole area back there. Okay, that's more or less what I'm doing.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it's all low-level security lighting along this edge. We've done that intentionally.
Good. Is all of this gonna make it into our, files on the web server? I don't know that I've seen this.
We will make sure it gets to you.
Yeah, I think, all the slides and stuff that was presented to us tonight, we'd love to be able to have those on the server so we can review them at our leisure.
Well, they have to be captured in our record, don't they?
I would say so. All right, and any other questions or comments from the board on the landscaping? Anybody in the room have a question or comment on landscaping? I don't see any hands raised on Zoom. If not, I'll just say thank you for that. I think that's quite a bit more landscaping work than we've previously seen in terms of, I think one of the factors that's pretty important to me is to have the landscaping that sort of breaks up any monotony of the building. We'd previously, talked more about the building design and how that's not sort of a monolithic facade. And I think this proposed landscaping goes much further than what we had previously seen to break up any sense of mass and monotony. I mean, the building's still going to be there. If you could make the building invisible, we'd love it if you could do that. I'm sure everybody would appreciate that. But short of that, this is a step in the right direction of making it relatively more attractive to folks from the street and across the street.
Yeah, I think we can use the landscaping to really help break down the scale of the facade, particularly along Worcester Street.
Yes, like I said, it's just the size of the building inherently makes it difficult to make it look really attractive from the residential zone across the street. But this certainly is going to help. So I now see Melissa Graves' hand raised on Zoom. I think you're already allowed to talk. So Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn earlier, not realizing we were just doing traffic then, but I guess I'm still looking at the photograph you had of the street view. It doesn't seem possible that you're gonna be able to save those trees, add in a whole sidewalk, keeping the root base of those trees, not disturbing it, and add in a 5-foot shoulder to the road, and not severely move the entire road up to the north. But I guess I'll have to hold on and trust you that that's actually happening.
Yes, I think we will be interested in seeing more detail on that.
Well, if I might on that point, I think that may end up being better dealt with a condition of approval that establishes certain parameters around it. Because, if, for example, the charge is, preserve and protect the existing trees, try to establish a 5-foot shoulder and a sidewalk, then have it all match the grades and everything else and try to figure all that out. That can be done, and then ultimately we've got to get Mass DOT to buy into the whole concept too. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole in the little time that we have left in this hearing process. So I think we can establish parameters. I think the parameter that the board will need to give us some feedback is how, you saw that kind of depiction, which was relatively dense. That's a subjective choice of people. Some might say that's too dense, particularly during the warmer months. That's not what we wanted to have, particularly since there's still going to be significant areas of open space across the street with the rest of the Wyman Gordon facility. But I don't want to mislead the board. We're not planning to spend an inordinate amount of engineering effort to try to solve this in the next month.
Yeah, there sometimes has to be sort of a balance, in terms of getting things to move forward. And I think, we need to keep in mind, everybody needs to keep in mind that a fair amount of this is dependent upon MassDOT.
Right.
And, sometimes MassDOT can take a rather long time to get around to reviewing and approving something. So yes, in a number of cases, this would not be the first time that in a permit, decision, we've included various conditions regarding some detailed design work that needs to happen, and ultimately, when the design does finally get finalized, it comes back to the board for review.
Sure. Understood.
And final approval. So I think that is the type of thing that can be handled as a condition in the permit. And as this discussion has, a lot of this discussion has sort of reminded us tonight that because you're proposing a fair amount of work that ultimately has to be approved by MassDOT, that a number of things depend upon them.
Sure thing.
It would be helpful to me if I could see, and for all I know, it's in one of the drawings, but I'd like to see where the state line, where the state layout line is in this area. That'll help, because I think that's as far as you're going to be able to go, isn't it? We can figure out who owns from there back. Can we get the state layout, document the state layout, actually along the whole section where we're talking about doing things.
Okay.
So do we have anything else that you would particularly like to bring to the board's attention this evening?
Not substantively on the application. What I think might be worth some discussion is actually a schedule for the next month. The letter you have from us proposes an extension of the time under 43D to April 6th. We think that's adequate for the board to digest the information and move forward. I think it requires some work in parallel tracks. I think, and Mr. McGoldrick and I have talked about it, I think we've talked since the fall through all of these about various conditions. I think it's time to put paper to pen and start to distill what those are in some fashion, as opposed to trying to piece it all together at the last meeting on some motion. So I'd urge the board to give Mr. McGoldrick some direction in that regard, and we can certainly work with him doing that, and we recognize you just got the traffic information. We're certainly willing to come back and talk about it and close out any other open issues.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not aware of anything that the board is expecting you to do to develop further information. You've done a lot of homework here, brought it back to us. We need some time, as we've said before, we'll need some time to digest it.
Yep.
But in the meantime, if there was anything else that the board needed for you guys to do, we'd want to set you to work on it. But at this point, I'm not aware of anything like that.
Well, there's certainly a few things that have come up in my 9 pages of notes that we've been asked to deal with in some fashion.
Yeah.
We'll go through that and we'll get it to you.
And so you've taken notes on some things that you plan to follow up on.
Correct.
We have, our task largely is to digest the traffic information and everything else we've heard tonight, and come up with any additional questions or issues that may arise out after we have thought through everything that we've heard tonight.
Sure. Okay.
I had suggested earlier that I'm thinking of the other hearing that I had specifically suggested that.
Starting to blend together, are they?
Our next meeting is March 14th. We could plan on continuing this to March 14th, and depending on where we're at that time, we can either close out or, you know, kick the can down the road another 2 weeks if we feel we need to. In any case, even now, it's probably possible to start at least roughly drafting a decision. So, I mean, Chris, presumably you have enough information to at least, you know, get to work on some elements of the decision.
Yeah, so to that point, I think it probably would be better to start to draft the decision, and, you know, in some of the discussion tonight, looking at, you know, what detail are we looking at in each of the plan phases from, you know, the board's initial approval all the way through to as-built. So that might also help to refine the deliberation and the points of what detail we need to drill down to, and what can be addressed through conditions. So I'm happy to start to draft that decision. We may not be at a fully, you know, fleshed out decision, but we can certainly get a lot of the progress done on that and get to a point that we can move forward.
Okay, so if we have a request from the applicant to continue the hearing to March 14th, we can move to grant that request.
If you want to, you have that or I can make a request and join it with the request to extend the 43D deadline to April 6th. It's up to you. Or you can do it separately.
Yeah, that's probably best to do it separately.
I would agree.
Okay?
But I mean, you know, so we have, you know, which reminds me,
Okay.
we have in hand the letter that the applicant consents to an extension of time to April 6th. And this letter, should we have a motion from the part of the board to?
Yeah, so just for a quick summary of the letter, so we're looking at from comments from the board, a extension of the decision deadline under 43D from the applicant to April 6th. What that'll do is push the decision deadline that the select board is ultimately under to render their decision to that April 6th, which should give you know, the planning board, not before the zoning board of appeals anymore, the Conservation Commission enough time to finalize their decisions as well, and then go before the select board. So we have signatures for all three of those.
Yes, this letter has a place for signatures from the chairman of each of the three boards.
So I will move that the planning board agrees and accepts the statements in this letter and authorize the chairman to sign.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Benkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. I will sign this and leave it with you for action by the other two boards.
I will say, I'm not real comfortable. We only have 2 meetings before that deadline.
Yep, this is true, that if, despite our best efforts, we can't issue the decision, you know, we find that it's going to take us longer, I would hope that the applicant would agree to additional time, but only as much as is really needed. I think we'll certainly make an effort to get things done.
Let's see where we are.
This is a fairly complicated decision, and we don't have a lot of past decisions to look at in this case, and so there's quite a number of
Understood.
complications built into it.
Understood.
That Chris is going to challenge with.
Then I'll make a formal request, Mr. Chairman, to extend the public hearing to March 14th.
I move that we grant the applicant's forthcoming written request and verbal request today to move the public hearing continuance to March 14th at 7:30 p.m.
We're granting, did you say granting his request?
I believe I did.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board grant the applicant's request to continue the hearing to March 14th. Discussion of the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody, and
Be a time this evening. We see it.
2 weeks from tonight, March 14th, we will continue this procedure, hopefully in a technical environment that will allow us to do this a little bit more comfortably and efficiently. And again, thank you for all for taking the time to pay attention to this, and we trust you will continue to do so. And with that,
Lost you, Dave.
okay, see if the owl is going to pay attention to me anymore. Maybe the owl thinks the meeting is being adjourned. All right, so I don't know how much more we want to try to get done tonight. It is getting late. Did you want to at least briefly mention the other zoning items that you have under consideration?
Yeah, so I'll leave the presentation that I had prepared for tonight for another time. But that's looking at, as discussed, so a lot of the marijuana businesses in town, since the regulation was passed, the rollout of those businesses, not just in Grafton, but in other communities, has changed. And there is, I think, a necessity to adjust some of the regulations to meet those minor adjustments. We're really going to be looking at delivery and hours of operation for businesses. So the recent updates to delivery regulations and definitions, as well as hours of operation to allow businesses to operate more efficiently, but also to allow for additional regulatory controls, and really kind of update those to meet the modern CCC regulations, or the contemporary CCC regulations. So that's the brief of it. The slides probably are a little bit intuitive, but certainly I'm happy to provide that presentation later. The other zoning article will be in regards to the outside dining, specifically looking at what provisions are in the zoning currently for outside dining and how to address those in the future. I'm sure the board is well aware, and we'll discuss briefly during staff report, that the governor's orders for outside, I believe it's liquor licenses and also outside dining, have had some adjustments. Some of those are expiring in April of this year. So we'll have a brief discussion on how that's going to affect existing restaurants utilizing our temporary outside dining, but how do we, the zoning will be looking at, as businesses look to make those options more permanent, what is a process to review that. So I still have some work to do to put that presentation together and to hash that out, but that will be forthcoming.
Regarding the cannabis delivery, have any businesses that have a license in Grafton, not necessarily ready to that are open, but any businesses that have a cannabis license in Grafton from the select board, the host community agreement, have any of them actually directly asked about this with us?
Yes, so there are existing businesses that have expressed an interest in delivery because of the regulatory climate. The fact that the Grafton zoning bylaw essentially is silent on delivery, it creates some question as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. And so that's primarily what we're looking to define, to give them comfort, and rather than operating on a silent bylaw, and allow the town more control over that question, essentially.
Yeah. Delivery was not an option when we drafted this bylaw.
I recall that, yes.
And now it is. So we need to revise the bylaw to accommodate delivery.
Yeah. the question was not if it was a no, it was not, I don't think we should do it. I think we should still do it. It was just a curiosity.
Yep.
And no, I thought the way, I'd have to go back and look at the words, but I thought we said sort of everything about marijuana is covered under here. And then we list some uses that are allowed, and uses that aren't listed presumably aren't allowed, or at least there's certainly an argument to that. So we have to look into it and sort out exactly what we're opening up.
Yep, we don't need to try to dig into that any more deeply tonight, given the lateness of the hour. On mill redevelopment, I trust there are no new developments on that as of yet.
No, I just did have a question, and I apologize. I had meant to look back at the video from last meeting, but my understanding for moving forward, and just to get the clear direction, I believe that the board is ready to start to look at warrant language for the zoning that was proposed. I don't believe that was kind of the direction that we were looking at. And then one of the comments that was received was that the board is looking to have some additional public engagement on the draft regulations. So I just wanted to touch on that, and if my understanding of where the direction of the board is on that is correct.
Yeah, I think.
Sounds right.
I think one of the things that we talked about at the last meeting was taking a look at this rough draft of the proposed bylaw, and in light of the properties that exist around town that might benefit from it.
Right.
You know, there were some questions about a couple of things like it mentions old fire stations. One of the questions was, the old fire station that we have, does it meet the qualification? There was a size qualification in there. So we wanted to take a look, we wanted a little bit more of a look into comparing some of the details of that with the properties around town that would be potentially eligible. You know, and while we were at one point we were thinking of trying to aim this at the Maytown meeting, the last meeting we pretty much concluded that our best bet is to shoot for the fall. Our most optimistic possibility is to shoot for the fall town meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, we have two old fire stations. There's one in South Bradford.
Yes, that really small one. That's been turned into sort of a museum.
Yeah, but it's an old fire station.
It is an old fire station.
And there's one right across from Bushel and Peck, and there's one right near Bridge Street. The building across from Bushel and Peck on Worcester Street.
Yeah, that's the old Station 1.
Yep. And then there's the one that's Engine Company 2. That building actually, that's still active.
That's still active, yeah. It's old, but it's still active.
Yes.
All right, so moving along then. Do you have any updates for us on the master plan?
I don't. So we're still awaiting kind of proposals for the master plan update. That is the deadline of that is coming up. So once we receive those proposals, we'll be reviewing those, and they'll certainly be forwarded to the board for their review, and we'll discuss that at a future meeting.
Yeah, two things that I've been doing on the master plan. One I had mentioned before, taking a look at the 195 recommendations that the old master plan made, and trying to assess, well, which of those have we done? And I am nearly complete with that exercise. I'm still waiting for information, to get information on 8 out of the 195 recommendations. Of the others, the results to date are that 48% of those recommendations are either represent ongoing work that is actually being done, work that has been completed, or work that's been at least partially completed. That's a rather higher percentage than I was expecting to find of recommendations that we have either accidentally or intentionally followed. 4% of them have been abandoned for perfectly good reasons, mainly based on the assumption at the time was that this building would be turned back into a school, and thus that we would need a whole new municipal complex. That assumption is no longer true, so the recommendations based on that have been legitimately abandoned. And then I found 41% of them so far that that haven't been done without any real explanation for why they haven't been done. So that's where I'm at with that. I'll be producing kind of a final report. It may be of not much more than academic interest, but it's to say, here's what we've done with that old master plan, here's what we've not done. It may be informative in terms of making future recommendations. The other thing I've embarked on is developing information describing the development of housing in Grafton over time to give us kind of a picture of how much housing has been developed over the years, where it's been developed over the years, and what the housing mix is and how the housing mix has changed, which hopefully will turn out to be informative for us thinking about the future of housing development in Grafton. That's a work in progress at the moment. Just to let you know that I started that was just as an informal exercise for myself, and then I realized we could actually potentially make use of this as we build our new master plan. So that's all I have on master plan. We do have some bills we could quickly vote on if someone cares to make a motion.
I move we approve the bills.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we approve bills. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We have minutes of our previous meeting, except on February 7th. I have,
Move we,
I was going to say I did not get a chance to review the minutes yet.
if you would prefer, we can defer that to our next meeting.
draw my motion.
Works for me.
Good enough. Staff report.
So just a brief couple dates. So March 8th, the select board has invited members of the planning board as well as zoning board and some other departments to a workshop meeting regarding outside dining. I certainly will be planning to attend to discuss that and to help the select board in their review of that. If board members would like to attend as well, please just let me know. If we have more than 2 members representing, we will have to post as a meeting. Nothing wrong with that, just I need to know so that I can post it.
Yep, and unfortunately, I have a prior engagement for that evening. I would love to attend that, but I can't be in 2 places at once.
Yeah. So,
I'm interested.
yeah.
I'm likely to attend, but I'll let you know.
Okay. And then March 1st, coming up quick, I will.
Like tomorrow.
I will be attending the MBTA communities, and that's a information session and workshop that's being provided through CMRPC. If you don't have that information and would like to attend, please let me know, and I'm happy to forward the link. Again, I will be attending and working through that as well. So.
Yep, I will.
I think I passed it through the office and out, hopefully, and mailed to everyone today.
Yes.
That's going to be a
Yeah,
that's going to be a serious subject, I think.
Yep.
The more we know, the better.
Yep, I've attended one briefing, I think by the same gentleman that's presenting this one, either earlier this month or late last month. I suspect this will be could very well end up being the same presentation, but if they have Q&A, this is for CMRPC communities, so there may be some Q&A that's kind of particular, sort of specific to our region.
Yeah. We have a number of subject communities, both primary and the one out. Towns like, I know Sutton, I heard from someone from Sutton about it.
So is that it for staff report?
That is.
Anybody see any correspondence that caught their eye? Any reports from planning board representatives and town committees and CMRPC?
Just what we just talked about.
That's good. Nothing else? Any other items which may lawfully come before the board?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned.